Beginning from at that point in time, but it's been quite a journey when you think of all the technological advancement, and frankly, it's going to I think accelerate even more as we move.
We're going to be getting into what's happening at GM in EVs and autonomous driving, and I think it's a kind of useful to remember. This has been a journey, hasn't it, of technological advancement. But we have to start with the obvious story of the moment, with what tariffs mean for your industry and your company. Right now, the US automotive industry is facing a 25% tariff. Plus, obviously, higher tariffs than that on nothing you import from China, which is a considerable feature of the global supply chain. Can you bring us in on your conversations with the president, with the administration? I know you've had a direct line through this process. There were moments where it looked as though you and a couple of your peers had, one does seem to be an area of overlap. The administration has a clear desire to see more manufacturing jobs in the US. GM's invested more than $35 billion in US manufacturing, I believe, over the last decade or so. What perspective does that investment, your experience, give you on where the US could still win in manufacturing?
Well, first of all, I definitely believe that the U.S. innovation that is happening in this country, and I think all of our global competitors are very capable. So I take everybody very, very seriously. And actually, we've invested in the last 5 years, we've invested $60 billion. And so very significant investments that we've made and to give consumers choice between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles. And so we're well positioned from that perspective. But I think as we look at, though, and understand that investment, because it's very significant, we need to help people understand that certain things can't move quickly. Everything can be moved over time, but we also have to do it effectively, and we have to do it in a manner where we're still competitive globally, because this is a global industry.
Over time, is it your intention to bring more of your manufacturing to the US?
Well, one of the important things that we need in our industry is, first of all, I need clarity. And then I need consistency, because again, as I said, if a new vehicle, a brand new vehicle comes out, every good stewards of our owners' capital, I need to understand what the policy is. And so we've already made some shifts of leveraging capacity that we already have, and looked at where components are supplied from. So we've been able to make, I'd say, important changes already. But any significant changes, we need that clarity to make sure we're making the right ones.
Be ready for the bad guys, the risks that exist out in the world. So the world's digital infrastructure is what you experience. That's what we run.
So it's all running smoothly, and you guys aren't really needed. Tell us, before we get on to the future of digital infrastructure, tell us what you actually see on a daily basis about the kind of health of it now. What is the average company's digital infrastructure looking like?
So first, let me share what our data says, and then I'll share how people feel about it, because it's a little bit different. Our customers tell us through our readiness report, our customers tell us 90% of them say we're world class as we sit here today. And our data, maybe that's a little bit optimistic, but our data on how much of the world's infrastructure is end of life and how much runs at global best practice and how many of the fixes are done in an automated way, infrastructure, private enterprise, it's been invested in, and they should feel pretty good about it. That doesn't mean that the bad guys aren't out there attacking it every day. That doesn't mean that, there are things that go bump in the night. But by and large, as we sit here today, the world feels that its digital infrastructure, 90% of them feel it's world class. When you ask them, however, are you ready for the challenges ahead? Are you ready to take advantage of AI or Gen AI? Are you ready to take advantage of cloud technologies where the innovation's showing? Are you ready for regulatory changes? Are you ready for skills shortages? Then all of a sudden that 90%, fewer than 40% feel like they're ready for what's next.
Right.
So there's this dichotomy in their opinion, in their view of how are we today and what's coming, tomorrow, week, month ahead. So AI also starts though with skills. So companies don't feel like they have skills. And even if you had the data right and the skills right, there's a long list of things that you have to be ready for. So as an example, again, given what we run in mission critical, the minute you decide that I'm going to try Gen AI in this part of my mission critical application, and I'm going to go, I'm going to move my data there and bring it back, you expose yourself now to new security risks. You lose something in resiliency that needs to be figured out. And then, of course, there's a pretty big cultural element to AI, deploying AI. So they don't feel ready because sometimes their data's not in the right shape. Sometimes their infrastructure is not as contemporary and modern as they need it. Sometimes the skills that they have aren't. They don't feel like they're ready.
But what are you advising them, clients to do?
They needed to move for the healthcare of their children. All of that we would lose. These rural hospitals are typically the second biggest employer in any community behind the public school system. And what it would mean is whether you have private insurance or on Medicaid, you drive hours to get the care you need from the same doctor who lost their job in your community. I'm seeing it on the ground right now. This will cause the American people to nearly revolt if they make these cuts. What major impact, both from jobs and from people struggling to get by. So there's been an announcement that a Social Security office in Hazard, Kentucky, also in Eastern Kentucky, is going to close. At the same time, they're going to shut down the call-in number for people to call that have questions. So what they're going to have is a senior having to drive from Hazard a couple of hours to another office, and they're not going to have all the paperwork they need because they weren't able to call the number and figure out what they needed. And what that means is someone who paid into the system, who's entitled to it, and who relies on it just to get by. Earth, they are Ford and SK on. The smaller one is 0.9 miles from beginning to end. Together, it's a $5.8 billion investment with 5,000 new jobs. Just down the road, AESC is building a $2 billion battery plant with 2,000 jobs. We just announced a new battery storage plant that a company called Canadian Solar is building. What matters most to people who fill those jobs isn't that it's a green job theoretically, it's a green job that helps their family, that puts food on the table. And a lot of people have tried to fight the future, and no one's ever won. And electric vehicles are definitely the future. And supporting these factories would fall into everything else the president's talking about. He's talking about reshoring things that are made elsewhere in the United States. We are doing more of that with EV batteries than anything else. Yet it's being attacked because of politics. But take it
1.5 years and look at a time of heightened inflation, which affects consumer confidence as much because you will have to make decisions on discretionary spend versus non-discretionary spend. Are you going to make that trip? Yes or no? And the consumer has adjusted. So the consumer today is an empowered consumer that will still stick to what they want to do. They still want to make that trip. Do I do 2 trips? Maybe not, or maybe I don't travel that far. But the adjustment to the environment, the consumer has clearly learned. So all of this is transpiring right now, as in we don't see any change at this point. But you look down the road, and we will, as a company, of course, because we have these data sources, continue to monitor. Where he's essentially made the point you just made. New business partner, I would say. And we get into this conversation about the choices that people today have in payments. You can pay with cash, you can pay with checks, you can pay with your wallet, you can pay with stable coins, you can pay with your crypto balances, you can pay any which way you like. And you can pay through a bank, you can have a payment solution directly with your favorite retailer. All of that is open today, so the competitive landscape has literally exploded. How do you differentiate in a world like that? Well, we're not a front-end B2C company. So we're not a Sony or a Walmart. We power the Sonys and Walmarts with our solution on the bank side. So we love the competition. We love the choices that are now on the market. We were the first company that went out to say, cards isn't the answer to everything. So we have 160 billion transactions run through our system every year. And machine learning and traditional AI, rules-based AI was how we've done that. It's the only way to deal with that. So that your transaction only goes through if it should, and it doesn't go through if it should. What we're now doing is we're leveraging generative AI. And then you say, well, how does it come? Why does this even make any sense? So take the following scenario. it's the weekend and your partner has said, why don't we go and travel XYZ? To XYZ destination, you say, well, how many miles do I have for this hotel, in my hotel account, my airline account? What is the latest information on what is a cool destination, etc.? So all of these things that you go through manually. In a world of agentic commerce, you have a smart agent that knows all your preferences, all of your balances and all of that, and will book this thing into stable commerce. And we have a lot of data, not personalized data, should have. Data on, through loyalty partnerships that we have with our customers, when people give their consent to put their miles information in, etc., etc. So all of this can be put together, and then the agent goes all the way through to the booking, all the way through to the payment. The world isn't designed around this today, but you can see a world where you have 5-6 agents in your life that do this. Everybody else has 5-6 agents in your life, and then you start to see how these agents do business with each other.
So how do you need to?
We, as BNI, our theory of change is investing in companies for development impact. We, have a portfolio of over 1,500 companies throughout the world. We employ over 1 million people. We invest in companies that are both financially sustainable as well as deliver development impact. So what we are now saying, instead of us originating these transactions, we'll originate it in such a way that we will use our capital in ways that can improve the risk-return profile of some of these projects, so that it reaches the threshold that is acceptable for these commercial institutions. Because many of the jurisdictions in which we operate, countries in Africa, fragile and frontier markets like Sierra Leone, like DRC, where we have investments, you will never find Prudential or Allianz or BlackRock or Brookfield investing in those.
Private sector coming to fill the vacuum. The first one is standards. We need now to establish what are the standards of investment. We're talking of replacing an economic order that has been there for 100 years with governance structures and institutions. The question is, will the markets, the capital markets, replace those structures? And it's then, if that will be the case, we need to see how our capital markets can democratize access such that this new order gives everybody an opportunity to play into the game. And that is really the issue. The standards we're talking about is transparency, is openness, it's known standards so that everybody can play by the rules.
They were alarmed when they found out not just that China had information on 170 million Americans, but that China was using it actively to manipulate what 170 million Americans were thinking.
Mm-hmm. So, would you be afraid, or, I would, if I was in your position, I think I would feel a little bit nervous about the idea of, okay, we've won this bid, we've got TikTok, that's great, but the algorithm is now gone. What is the value for users if the algorithm is gone? And are you afraid that users, once they logged into their feeds, saw it wasn't feeding them the same kind of stuff that they're used to seeing, that they would?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not going to happen like turning on or off the lights here in this room. There's a transition period. So it's going to be a year, 8 to 18 months of transition from the current version of TikTok to the new version of TikTok. Importantly, we need to demystify the algorithm a little bit. Yes, TikTok has a powerful algorithm. It's designed actually to specifically addict, engage, and scrape people's data, right? And as a propaganda tool, then to feed those people who are addicted information that is with pro-Chinese sentiment. So we're not looking to replicate that algorithm. That's not an algorithm that should be replicated, and that's why the legislation was passed in the first instance. Lastly, big data, small algorithm will beat big algorithm, small data any day. So there are lots of people, and we have many of them in our employ, that are experts at creating algorithms into a place where we'll be curating our own algorithms. We now have an app store. Soon there'll be an algorithm store. You'll be picking and choosing algorithms that combined create the feed that you want. So this is the power of the technology as it's advancing. The fundamental point of Project Liberty is not that the tech is bad or the tech shouldn't advance or the internet isn't wonderful. The fundamental point is that we should each own and control our data, because our data is our personhood. It is us in the digital age. We should own ourselves. We should permission the use of our data rather than being surveilled. We should go on the internet and signal what we're interested in rather than being targeted. So that's at the core of the project.
And that turned out to be extraordinarily valuable and helped America become this pinnacle of modern technical innovation. Not a lot of other countries adopted that stance. And counterintuitively, there were a whole bunch of policymakers who actually thought that we got that wrong. And as I dug deeper into why, it's because the analogy of social media to AI models in particular was the wrong frame. Because AI models aren't like social media, right? Social media gives individual users the ability to amplify their intentions, whereas models don't have agency or intentions. They're just math. It's literally matrix math that you're running on large pieces of data. And so when I sat down with the policymakers and started on trying to ask, what's the assumption that's leading you to believe that models should be good? I started to realize that there were some basic principles that were just not well understood. And that led to this whole realization of the idea of AI becoming cultural infrastructure and mattering to every individual nation much more than social media ended up being. The key mistake, I guess, or the thing that's difficult for people to realize early on is that AI models aren't just computing infrastructure. The models often get talked about as in the same vein as the internet or storage, networking, compute, or electricity for that matter, right? So it's become a type of critical national infrastructure, and a lot of regulators want to regulate it that way. But
you would get 10 times higher clicks. Today, you get 99% lower clicks. And so that headwind has caused issues with the growth. Obviously, for people who promoted it, or sort of the attitudes change over time. But the good news is it's all coming back in a much more sustainable way. Over the last 6 months, alone, we've doubled the average revenue per user. We're getting 3 times as many new users coming in this year as last year. And again, the product's much more sticky. So if you think about the ways we're going to integrate within the fan experience, we want to be everywhere the fan is. And anything you do in the worlds of NBA, NFL, Disney, whether physical or digital, we want you to get rewarded inside of our product. And the status that you gain within our product by kind of investing in your fandom, we want to make sure it's rewarded in these other uses. So our 2 biggest source of users right now are coming either directly through the NBA. So if you go sign up for NBA ID, you get your first NBA Top Shot. Those users are very valuable. They still have to kind of dig to find it inside the product, but that's been a very valuable source of users. And the second most valuable source of users was during the NFL season. Many of the games, at least one every week, you went to that game, you got a digital collectible from that same game. So it was much more integrated into the fan journey, and they kind of got introduced to that concept of, hey, these are digital things, I can save them over time, I can maybe sell them in the marketplace. Those users are incredibly sticky as well. More recently, there's been some influencers that are starting to talk about it, small scale folks, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 followers. But those users have also been very sticky because they're coming in through kind of personal referrals.
and things like augmented reality.
You know what that moment was like, because have you been called to testify in this?
I have not. No, let's
Maybe now that'd be great. What would you say on stage if people were asking you about the pressure you got? Because what happened is they copied you quite a bit. As I joked, you were the chief product officer.
Well, the first, we'd had some familiarity with their sort of attempts to copy the service before they
made the offer. I think the first time they built something called Poke, which was almost like a like-for-like copy of Snapchat, and they put it in they put a banner at the top of Facebook, download Poke, and we were really worried that that people would stop using Snapchat and start using Poke, but the opposite actually happened. I remember
It's called Poke.
it actually ended up raising a lot of awareness for Snapchat and drove more usage and growth of Snapchat. So I think sometimes, their attempts to copy our business have actually helped drive growth. I think the same could be said for vertical video. So in the early days, back in the day, people actually put horizontal, those kind of like TV-sized videos on smartphones. That's how most people watch video on the smartphone, or you had to turn your phone to watch the video full screen. We really pioneered full screen vertical video, but advertisers didn't want to cut their videos specifically for mobile. They didn't want to have to record custom videos. But as soon as Meta started embracing vertical video as a default ad format, that changed immediately. And that really provided a bit of a tailwind for our business. So I think just given their scale, when they copy our ideas, sometimes it actually can provide a bit of a tailwind for our business.
So when you look at that, how is that like to compete as a much smaller company? Right now your company's worth 13 billion, something like that. What is it like to compete against bigger?
Well, I think one of the reasons why folks are shifting to look at entertainment is because ultimately engagement with friends and family is finite, right? You only have so many friends. They only post so many videos every single day. So if you want people to continue to use your service, you have to show them content from influencers or from publishers, or other folks who aren't necessarily your friends. And so I think what TikTok, what Meta has worked on, obviously, we also, have an offering for influencers. We call them Snap Stars to share with their fans. I think folks have found that, beyond just watching content from friends, people also want to see content from the broader world. And now, obviously, with AI, it's easy to personalize that content so you see something.
So what do you do now, do you say?
Yeah, I think in general, when we looked at social media, we felt that the old model of social media would be unsustainable because there was a huge push to get people to add more friends so they would have more content in their feed. And ultimately, people were forced to add more and more people they didn't know, and that made them feel less comfortable sharing. And so ultimately, our view was that we should build a service around people you do know very, very well, not encourage you to go add a bunch of friends, but really add the people that you care about and want to talk to. And then use AI to recommend content from influencers or people you don't know that you might be interested in watching, but not necessarily somebody that you're friends with. And so I think very early on, if you look at the design of Snapchat, we really had this messaging service. We have our camera so people can create all sorts of videos. And then we had stories or our Discover platform where we would surface content from people you didn't know. So I think very early on, we recognized that we would need to bifurcate our service into messaging with your close friends and family, people you cared about. Yeah, we're extremely excited about what we're doing with augmented reality and with our Spectacles AR glasses. We started working on them, I think, about 11 years ago now. They started with really, really simple glasses with just a camera in them, and over time have now evolved to incorporate a display so you can overlay computing on the world around you. But the fundamental opportunity we see is to change the way that people use computing. Today, computing feels very isolating. People are stuck behind a screen. When I was growing up, I had to go to the computer lab at lunch to use a computer, or folks are looking down at a very small smartphone screen. And I think we constantly hear that people feel like it takes them out of the moment. It takes them away from their friends, out of the real world. And with glasses, we see a real opportunity to integrate computing into the real world and also make it an experience that is shared. So for years, I've talked about this vision of looking out, the window of our house and seeing our kids running around, playing together outside, and looking at my wife and saying they just computer. And that's really the vision that we have, that computing can be shared, that it can be something that people can enjoy, and that brings them outside and together. And, it's literally 2-3 weeks ago now, I was looking out the window, and sure enough, 2 of our kids were running around. The glasses are a little big still, so they're holding them with one hand, but they're running around, jumping and playing together. And it was just so exciting to see that computing can be something that brings people together in the real world in a way that isn't possible with the screens.
It's not going to get where it's going next.
So one of the reasons why we push so early and quickly into building out our own operating system and our own platform is because we believe that will enable us to compete more effectively going forward. It's really easy to copy glasses with a camera inside of them. It's very difficult to copy all of the AR experiences that are built by developers today on Snapchat or on our glasses. So we're now on our 5th generation of the glasses. We have all sorts of developers building amazing things for spectacles. And so when we're ready to share them with consumers, not only will there be a full set of experiences available, but I think we'll be better positioned to compete because we've, worked not just to develop glasses, but to develop an ecosystem around them.
What is
The best use right now, my favorite is playing with our kids. We have basically a way to play make-believe with dinosaurs, but you can share that experience together. So you can build your whole dinosaur world and run around outside and play together.
and see the dinosaurs?
Yeah, that's a ton of fun.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. Privacy has always been so important to us because it's critical to free expression, right? To people feeling comfortable expressing themselves. And I think folks say all sorts of things in private with a close friend or a family member that they wouldn't say publicly to the whole world. And so I think as we've looked at architecting Snapchat, building Snapchat, that privacy has been central to a product that does make people feel comfortable expressing themselves. And, I remember in the early days, just the notion of deleting messages after they were sent was so radical because back in the day with a hard drive, the old school plate hard drives, it was more expensive to delete something because you had to write over it, and that would actually wear out the hard drive disk faster. So it was easier to just leave it there and not delete it, and then eventually write over it, with some new piece of data at some point. And so we actually had to do a lot of work to make the case for, why it makes sense to build technology that reflects the way that we communicate every day. I mean, the vast majority of our conversations, FaceTime or face-to-face, the vast majority of human expression isn't recorded, and I think it's important that technology reflects that as well.
Last question, there's an opening at the top of Doge. Would you consider taking it?
I empathize because it's a very challenging and thankless job. And one of the reasons why is because I think something like 70% of our budget in the United States is mandatory spending, right? So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the interest expense, which I think is now north of $1 trillion. So the vast majority of our budget, you can't really touch. And then you look at the federal workforce, I actually looked this up the other day. Since 1990, when I was born, the federal workforce has shrunk. It actually went from 3.4 million people to about 3 million people today. And the US population over that period of time grew by about 98 million people. So I think you have a federal workforce that's smaller today. So I think most importantly, I also had ChatGPT estimate the number of rules and regulations, federal rules and regulations that have been put in place since then. It's 140,000. So you have a smaller workforce supporting about 100 million more people with 140,000 more rules and regulations. So my general view, I think, of these efforts to reduce costs in the government really has to start with the rules and regulations. If you want a smaller IRS, let's simplify the tax code. I mean, we can create a flat tax on income, dramatically clean up the tax code, reduce the need for audits, and then ultimately, you could reduce the workforce. But I think it's not realistic to reduce the workforce without simultaneously reducing the rules and regulations that make it so hard for that workforce to get their jobs done.
So a chainsaw wouldn't be your problem. What would be your problem?
The magic wand, I think.
Days get squeezed very, very quickly. So then it goes to access to capital. And the challenge is small businesses are the ones that have the least access to capital of anyone. It's one of the things I'm very proud of at PayPal. We've put $30 billion of working capital loans into the small business community. It's our ability to see differentiated data and ensure that months of cash flow to be able to survive.
Yeah. And this is, given all the economic uncertainty, this is one conference where AI has not been the topic du jour, but obviously every company is trying to figure out how to take advantage of this technology, including PayPal. How are you deploying it in terms of helping consumers and small businesses, and particularly for small businesses, in terms of improving productivity, taking more advantage of the data they have? How are you helping them?
I see AI as obviously tremendous future advancement. It is here, but it's also one of those things that, again, if I first focus on small businesses, they are the underdog. The playing field is not level. And if you think about what you need to take advantage of AI, you need tremendous amounts of data, and you need tremendous amounts of really good data scientists. Those are two things small businesses don't have. By definition, they are just, cash strapped, human resource strapped, and they don't have access to data. And so we look at platforms like PayPal and say, hey, we have to be that platform that we do have tons of really, really good data scientists and tremendous amounts of data. So how do we leverage AI to give our small businesses that competitive advantage? How do we let them understand what products they should be bringing in, who they should be selling to, where else they should be going after consumers? And so we're leveraging our AI platform to be able to empower small businesses. If I also look at consumers, though, I do think we are moving into, a really exciting but unknown future of shopping as well. I think we're heading towards agentic commerce. I think, if whether you all are using different AI agents, I know that my kids spend a lot of time talking to AI agents. They're sitting there on their phones having conversations. And part of those conversations inevitably lead to some sort of shopping potential. And so I don't think we're very far away from being able to go from, a normal shopping cart on a shopping page to, hey, I want to go on a trip and I need a new outfit and I need, to arrange travel and transportation. And having an agent actually do that on your behalf is both really exciting, but also creates all sorts of uncertainty and challenges. I think that's an opportunity for us to be able to protect consumers the way that we always have with PayPal, but make sure that safety, security, your data privacy, and all of that is well protected while we're moving into this future of commerce.
Yeah.
Abilities of different merchants. It's just easier and easier. And so this is the constant battle of AI between fraudsters and between, folks like us that are trying to protect consumers and protect merchants. But again, if you then think about the next version of that, I do think we're going to get to a point where you're going to want, just think about the efficiency of an agent-to-agent commerce transaction, right? Just think how much simpler it would be to allow, a trip to be able to be planned where agents can understand your data, make it all work for you, negotiate on your behalf, get you the best price, and actually complete it. That's wonderful. But you really want to make sure that you don't want to wake up and have your money gone from your bank account. And so we are working very hard across our consumer network to ensure that biometrics are in place, that agents understand when they need to actually ping the consumer. What are the rules that consumers have put around their wallet? We have a smart wallet through both PayPal and Venmo that allow consumers to actually put rules and understanding so that agents are working on your behalf, not surprising you with new purchases that you didn't know about. And bespoke, beautiful, and things that consumers are searching for. But, if you think about today, if you go into a normal search engine and you type in, a couple of keywords for a product, it is unlikely that a small business is getting on the first 2, 3, 5 pages of those search results. They just can't afford to be able to pay for those paid results. So AI can actually turn that around, right? If you're putting into your personal shopping background that you want those bespoke purchases, you want something that's local, you want something that is made locally, AI can start to take those preferences and actually give you the right answer. So we think that's a really interesting opportunity that we're, again, leveraging our data, leveraging that two-sided ecosystem that we have with PayPal of, again, the hundreds of millions of consumers and tens of millions of merchants to be able to make those connections.
Complex because of data. AI is only useful if it works on the data of an enterprise. And that is very hard to organize for AI. So I think that's going to be your gating factor rather than a macroeconomic issues.
So for companies that are trying to deploy it at scale, they seem to have moved past sort of the experimentation phase. They're kind of gotten over the hype phase, but as you say, deploying it at scale, company-wide, and getting, employee buy-in and organizing their data and figuring out even what data they have. A lot of companies are finding like it's so siloed, they actually don't know all the useful information they carry. What are the biggest challenges? And
I think that's why I think the agentic thing, more than just the chatbots, the agentic stuff is showing companies real value. They're able to implement it, they're able to reduce costs, improve customer satisfaction, reduce time to market, reduce time to collect money, real hard business issues. So we're seeing that. I think that will be the tipping point on usage. That's why I think the takeoff will happen. But you can't again implement it in silos because over time you'll create a new set of legacy applications. You have to think through how do you put all of it together on an enterprise-wide architecture, and that's where the best companies are trying to figure that out.
Yeah. And what about
But if you can create in the safety of some kind of a lab where they have their own speakers and they are talking to this AI, and the AI is very gently correcting them, and the AI figures out that they don't know the syllable or they don't know this vowel or whatever, then by practice, the AI helps them get better. So this is a safe space. The teachers like it because they don't, that gets happened and then the kids can come by. So you have to think through all this. How do you make a safe space? How do you make it non-embarrassing for the kids? How do you create a model where the child is willing to invest time, they can get better? And we are seeing some good results now. We're going to get researchers and impact and analysts to actually see the benefits. But I think the first indications are positive.
Yeah.
A huge talent pool for AI. Already, if you look at platforms like GitHub, India is the second largest set of developers on the platform globally after the US.
Yeah, I remember last year you were like, there's no more Chinese on GitHub, there's only Indians.
Same thing with students, but I don't know what will happen there. But so that's on the AI talent. But the other area where I think India will lead is actually deploying applications that make sense for people. And we talked about that. Because the way it works is, it's not about AI replacing jobs. It's about AI amplifying human potential. And in a society where there are not enough doctors, not enough teachers, can you actually use AI to improve the productivity substantially of doctors, teachers or doctors so that more people are reached in services? So you're going to see that kind of a trend. So I think India will be the use case capital of AI. And there will of course be, people will build their models and all that. But increasingly the competitive thing is going to go into applications. How to use all this stuff. It's nice to build more models, but you have to make it work for some useful person. In that area, India will lead.
Well, leaving our bilaterals to one side, because we're one part of this broader equation, and I'll come back to our bilaterals in a minute. The bottom line is that I think what's clear on the central question here, which is, can you begin to find a framework to stabilize the US-China trade and economic relationship? That's the central question for all of us. I think many of us have been encouraged by recent statements by the Secretary of the Treasury, also by President Trump himself, about the need to find, my words, not theirs, an off-ramp to where we've been in recent weeks and months. What we do not know yet is what precise form and shape that will take. But I know that the administration will be keen, as I'm sure those in the Chinese administration will be keen to find a way through on this. And that is so fundamental to the future stability of markets. You know the downstream consequences of any further bifurcation of the two economies. And the supply chain impact will be enormous. The inflationary impact will be enormous. The disruption to the global economy will be enormous. So it is in our collective interest for this particular negotiation to get underway.
If I may, Secretary, also Secretary Best.
That patient. I think, but no, we are deeply engaged with our friends and partners in the administration, all the relevant cabinet secretaries. We've been that way engaged for some months now. And so we have optimism that we'll be able to land an arrangement in time. But the US is currently juggling multiple negotiations with many countries at the moment. And Australia is in the middle of its own general election. That election will be held on Saturday week. And I'm sure we will see the administration continue to engage. I've had no problem with access to the administration. I speak to the relevant cabinet secretaries on a regular basis. But these things take time. Australia is an all-weather ally and strategic partner of the United States. Has been that way for 3/4 of a century. The origins of that lie in the dark history of the Second World War. And so these things are deeply entrenched. Our formal security alliance 951, the Five Eyes Intelligence Arrangement, our AUKUS arrangement, our Quad partners with both Japan and with India, our free trade agreement. The institutional framework of this relationship is in solid state. So therefore, when I look, for example, at continuing Australian opinion poll data research, which indicates a continuing high level of Australian support for the security line of the United States, that's the fundamental factor. Having been a Prime Minister of the country myself in the past, it's my melancholy duty to report that politicians come and go. But alliances relationships, when they're based on common values and common interests, are enduring. And so, therefore, I think we need to take collective deep breath about these things. And I'm sure that's the position of both the major political parties engaged in the Australian election.
Well, I can see that President Trump has made that as a topic. I mean, as a negotiating, part of a negotiation. We see. I think from private sector, they're probably flexible to talk, but it has to be a fair deal if that is to be really brought into this. But also, I see Phantom. Actually, Phantom of China has already done a lot of things already. For example, I read the op-ed by the former Assistant Deputy Secretary of State Department of Biden administration. Basically, he was saying, since they were talking with China for the last year, a lot of progress has been made. The death rate of fentanyl in the U.S. has dropped to 27%. So it's really, hard to see why Trump started on this. Let's talk. It's already a good pattern with the Biden administration on this topic. But let's just continue to talk rather than just raise 10% and another 10% without even talking. So I think things can't really move if both sides, particularly U.S., is serious enough to do those things. Because U.S. maybe has some trade deficit on goods, but the U.S. enjoys enormous service trade. $1 trillion, 300 billion surplus. U.S. dollar has been used as a global reserve for 60%. And then U.S. dollar has been printed as to buy the world. And actually, a lot of investment comes to the U.S. stock market has benefited enormously. And on top of that, also U.S. Has a great university, attract talents from all over the world. 30% of AI talent in the U.S. coming from China, basically. And of course, you can see also the manufacturing goods of all those manufacturing. The U.S. was abandoned years ago because it was too heavy, too dirty, environmentally unfriendly. U.S. wants to concentrate on high-tech, education, biotechnology, AI, digital. So U.S. you can't just dominate all the sectors. Now you're talking about manufacturing, you want to dominate again. So I think we should have a bit more of a competitive advantage, and then let those heavy-duty manufacturing stuff. No U.S. actually Americans wants to do it. That was done in China, India, ASEAN. So probably to bring them all back to the U.S. is not realistic, and it was not a right choice to do that. He really think the efficiency, because you remember the Tesla plant in Shanghai was designed, built, and rolling on the assembly line within 1 year. That's incredible speed. And then furthermore, the tariff war that President Trump is imposing on is not just on China. 70% laptop coming from China. Half of the 80-90% iPhone, iPads coming from China. And it's all made by American companies. Walmart used to purchase 80%, now 60% supplies coming from China. And then, so I see President Trump already relaxing in laptop and iPads, all those things. But I think it's not enough. And so President Xi actually met 50 global CEOs about a month ago. And he was saying that the multinationals has contributed almost 40%, 1/3 of China import-export is also by the multinationals. So you're hitting those companies, not only hitting Chinese companies, but hitting your own companies, multinational companies, European companies. I have a big European company complain about that because they have a lot of legal parts. And for auto parts, all of them coming from China. So I think we're already in a very intertwined world. It's really silly to go back to the very primitive 19th century, 18th century. So it's totally intertwined. And the US is dominant in so many areas on talent, on the investment, on winning US dollars, on the digital, on AI. But you can't just say, oh, I'm not going to dominate everything. I want to put everything back to the US. It's not realistic. But in one global village, we have to really let everybody grow. And also, this is going to be devastating for all the global developing countries in the US, the second largest economy, not in this kind of fact.
Global environment, generally speaking, this has been the case for the last 5 years. Big disruptive events. You're talking about a global pandemic, about 2 wars, war in Europe, war in the Middle East. I mean, these are pretty incredible events that happen in very young over 70 years in the world. So it's quite, but we've seen also is how the world has been resilient. The economy has been resilient throughout these quite interesting events for these last 5 years. Now, this is, again, more volatility that we're seeing here today. The funny thing, well, it's funny, but the interesting thing was when we were looking at end of 24, close of 24, from my perspective, looking at the next 5 years, as I was working with my management team in Guadalajara, it looked okay. I remember closing the year out in 24 saying, wait, listen, we weathered these 4 or 5 years, quite difficult. We did very well, happy with our performance, happy how we managed it. And now things look a bit clearer. The Trump administration had obviously won the election, we knew what was coming, pretty much anticipated what we thought was going to be this year. And it looked like relatively blue skies, some clouds here and there, manageable overall. Tariffs, obviously, this is the subject matter of the day. Everybody expected that unexpected in the form of now. And we have to go back to the normal and understand what this means for the US economy, what this means for the global economy, what it means basically everything we do for our business or for our outlook in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. I think from a long-term perspective, let me start with that. Not necessarily. I think for a global investor like ourselves, and having the benefit of looking at a 5-year and 10-year horizon, every decision we take is a bit easier in that sense to manage through that. In the short term, more complicated. Has an impact. Some not necessarily has an impact on that particular transaction with the horizon we're looking. So I think what we are doing is changing our basic assumptions. That we're doing. And in doing so, we are taking a bit more time in terms of how we look at these investments. We're not stopping.
Are we entering a new paradigm, a new world, or are we just going through a short-term
shift? I think people are going from a different tariff environment April 1st to a new tariff environment, or whatever it is, post April 2nd. So I think is unquestionable. And I also believe that I think the impact of that change on growth is also clear, that there is an impact. The size of that impact, we will all have different opinions on it, but there is an impact on growth, both global growth and growth of the US economy in at least 2025, 2026, next 12 to 18 months. I think a set of foreign funds and large institutions that have over the last 30, 40 years evolved, become really high quality investment institutions, such as Guadalajara, such as IDS, such as Agnog and MGS, many institutions that are coming out of that ecosystem. Very mature ecosystem in terms of institutions that are investing globally. The UAE represents, the United States represents the biggest market for these institutions. That's been the case for the last 30 years. It will be the case going forward because of the merits of this economy, this great country that has consistently delivered high quality economic output with companies and businesses, the sectors, at least I'll come to that particular question, the sectors we like consistently. The US economy will always be let's say, a major this destination of capital coming from UAEs. That will change. So accordingly, I think looking at a 10-year horizon, effectively that equation is closed. It follows the strategic investment plans of all these institutions, looking into account the last 10 years and how they've invested, and looking at the next 10 years and how we intend to invest, both in terms of the economy and the sector. What are the sectors? Obviously, technology is a very important space. It's a space that I think, notwithstanding the first question, doesn't change the narrative that the U.S. will continue to be a leader in that space, and that is an investment space we like. Infrastructure is another space we like, and I think again, if this continues, I think the vision that's sector will be. Energy is another sector we're very people are investing in. It's an area well leaders and we will continue to invest. So just looking at these three general themes, energy, infrastructure, and technology, that represents what we're looking at in the next 10 years. And with the companies and investment institutions that I've just described, that fits the theme, and that's why.
And that level of, call it creative destruction, in the Trump administration was surprising to me. But that's probably the one big thing. Its way to yes with the United States anytime soon. Let's keep in mind it's not only that their senior leadership considers present tariff levels a joke, and I use that word literally, but also because such a big component of the negotiations that are happening right now between the United States and over 100 other economies. It's not just about their tariffs. It's not just about market access. It's also about aligning strategy in a decoupling with China. So the Chinese are not okay with that, right? So that is not fixable in my view. It's also not fixable because this is not something that Trump and Xi can do by themselves. You actually need a very strong team that is aligned that can execute on what such a deal would look like. And this team cannot do that. Not with the Chinese. With Japanese, sure. You know, with the Mexicans and Canadians, sure. Not with the Chinese. So I think I think it is inconceivable that we can get back to the status quo ante U.S.-China relationship pre-Liberation Day under this administration. Inconceivable. In that technology suite and the supply chain, they'll be dominant in the COP summits going forward. World Health Organization, I mean, you know, on and on and on. The long-term geostrategic opportunities are for the number two, as the Americans say, not it. Don't want to drive collective security. Don't want to drive free trade. Don't want to drive rule of law. Don't want to drive exported democracy. Well, who's in the best position to pick up as a consequence of that? China, China, and China. Treat the Russians and Ukrainians in the same way. The Russians are responsible singularly for the actual invasion, and Trump has not acted that way. But I also recognize that Trump's willingness to use real pressure on the Ukrainians when he cut off, suspended intelligence and defense aid did make the Ukrainians take him seriously, not just on the critical minerals deal, but also in accepting a ceasefire without conditions, which Biden could have done and did not. I give Trump full marks for that. But he has not been willing to use any of that pressure on Putin, and Putin has responded, as one might expect, by refusing to engage meaningfully on a ceasefire. So you're right that this morning we saw Trump post that he was unhappy with Putin killing a bunch of civilians in Kiev. Fair enough. I am also unhappy with that. I think that where we are heading right now, the most likely path, is that Trump is unwilling to put sufficient pressure on the Russians to get them to yes. He's unwilling to blame the Russians singularly for it falling apart and him not being able to get the deal that he has promised as a pretty high priority for well over a year now. And as a consequence, he walks away from both countries, which means no more US aid for the Ukrainians. And it also means no rapprochement with Russia. That's where I think we are heading right now. And there are very significant geopolitical and economic implications that stem from that. What happened are doing a lot more. Right. And walking away is very different from Trump calling Putin for 90 minutes, not telling the Europeans, and doing a deal with Russia over their heads. So it is not the worst possible scenario. It is one where Trump will feel like, look, this is a European problem. Europeans are going to have to solve it. I tried. They're both idiots. I'm not going to do it. In the near term, Europe will provide an awful lot of support for Ukraine. And will that support be adequate to allow the Ukrainians to continue to defend their front lines? That is a very important question. Will the Europeans be able to stand up security guarantees that will deter the Russians from going after all of Ukraine and from removing this Zelensky administration, which continues to be an active priority of Putin? That is an open question. Will the EU be able to hold together in support of Ukraine when they are not acting in contradiction to the Americans, but they're doing it almost completely by themselves?
A single mother working from her home, making something and selling it to someone else. And so what we're very focused on are what's called de minimis exemptions, our small parcel exemption. So in the United States, you can bring an item into the United States, and if its value is less than $800, that's not subject to customs or duties. That means it's not going to wait a week to get inspected, and then it's not going to get whatever the tariff is. Now, there are folks who are abusing that. There are folks, for example, in Asia, who might ship a full container of product of 1,000 identical items, get to the port in Los Angeles, and then describe that as 1,000 different individual packages and take advantage of the de minimis exemption. There is some common sense reform that should happen there. But for the actual small business, for that American woodworker who's going to make something and 3 times a year they're going to ship it to a buyer in Paris or in England, they have no idea how to navigate customs and duties. It would blow their mind to try to learn that. These are carpenters or craftsmen, and so our job is both to make sure that we can make that as easy as possible on our side for them, but also to advocate. We think de minimis exemptions are actually incredibly important. This would be our version of that, is to maintain the de minimis exemptions for the honest small sellers, working with trusted trading partners like Europe, like Canada, to make sure that those people, that we can still allow people to start a business without causing too much friction. And that's the main thing that I'm concerned about, is it needs to become ever more easy to start a business. In this world where automation is changing the nature of work, the fastest growing part of the economy is actually businesses of one. And over 90% of all businesses are solo entrepreneurship. And when you think about what's happening with automation, Gen AI, the ability of one person to act like a much larger entity is ever greater. So that's the part of the economy we most want to safeguard. And we think de minimis is critical for it. I believe it comes from a place of genuine, authentic care for that person. Many of those people are Etsy sellers who wake up every day and take their creative passion and turn it into an actual product they make with their own hands and they sell. And we want to support those people and we want to protect those people. And I know that many of these policies are intended to help our sellers. And honestly, from a first order effect, Etsy is probably better positioned than almost anyone in that. If de minimis exemptions go away in China, where candidly I think there's a ton of abuse, but we maintain de minimis exemptions in Europe, between the US and Europe, I think that Etsy buyers and sellers will largely not have any impact from tariffs. However, if the result is inflation and American consumers feeling much poorer, that would be very bad for Etsy. That would be very bad for Etsy sellers. So what we most need is a vibrant economy with healthy U.S. consumers to support our sellers. And then we want to do that within a construct of fair trade and common sense reform.
My employment environment. But cash flow is number one. And I think, what does that mean? Well, you think about, the uncertainty of tariffs, for example. That means the pressure on your cost of goods sold, your pricing ramifications to your own customers, what might be the ramifications of increased prices on lower demand. all of a sudden, what is a perennial challenge
Right.
has the ability, if not well managed, to be an even bigger one. So this is a time of uncertainty for them, and cash flow is number one. As I said, that is the perennial challenge of our small businesses, and they would say, in every survey we have done across time, whether sales growth is increasing, receding, the number one issue within cash flows is being paid late. So for all of you who run large businesses that have a supply chain that involves small businesses, the number one thing you can do to help, pay on time. Right, so we at large enterprises are used to stretching our payables. We're like, well, we've got 30, 60, 90 days. Does Google care if I pay like that, bill for ads last month that we ran? They do care, but as a CEO, I might sign that AR, that AP late. But for small business in your supply chain, late payments is really maybe one of the most critical issues.
I know.
I think that we would all agree that the last 30 days have been a roller coaster for the global economy, and we don't run XSBI every 30 days. But to give you an indication, which is no surprise, the Small Business Optimism Index from the National Federation of Businesses here in the U.S. Small business optimism peaked in December of 24, and I think within the last month it's been on a 5-point decline. And this data point was, I think, for the first week of April. So we'll see what the next indicator tells us. But optimism is declining, and I think with good reason, because as many of you know, they don't know what to prepare for or how to prepare. Now, many of you, if you shop at goods-based businesses, might already be seeing some of the effects, which is some of these prices are coming through. Price rises are coming through. I was talking to somebody yesterday who told me that a piece of furniture they were thinking about buying, a month ago is now up $200. So I think some of it, they are having no choice but to pass some of that pricing, that cost of goods sold into their own prices. It doesn't. Like, look, we are services-based businesses, so we ourselves are not directly, but our customer is. So as an example, our subscriber growth will slow if new business formations slow. Our subscriber growth, it could be affected, or if businesses shut down at a disproportionate rate, of course, it could affect our growth. More importantly, we're here every day to help them thrive. So the advice we're giving them right now, which is, again, what you would expect, is we've invested heavily in, we purchased a company called Sift out of South Africa to have leading benchmarking and forecasting tools. So the ability to give them more advanced analytics. This is even before AI, which we'll come to in a moment. Number two, on our platform, big investments in digital payments. So, in many countries around the world, Xero was founded in Australia and New Zealand. Open banking is the thing. It's easier maybe to have real-time payments, or even not real-time, digitally enabled payments. The US is far behind. So investments on our platform in ways to pay and ways to get paid faster. So we can really, have them move to real-time digital payment systems, helps them, again, increase their cash flow. So I think we are very attuned, I'd say, to everything in and around forecasting insights cash flow on both pay and getting paid, and getting our customers to attach and adopt digital payments.
And then considered a successful campaign. Now campaigns in China are saying 5 million USD is a success because people are raising more money, people are being more successful, people are opting to build careers within the creator economy like never before. And Kickstarter is really at the center of all that. The other thing that I would say is that just all the infrastructure from music to film, etc., when it becomes more challenging, Kickstarter becomes, it benefits Kickstarter. When VC money, when people aren't putting out VC dollars, especially for physical products, which tend to be a little bit harder, Kickstarter becomes the kind of go-to place for that. It is. You just see it within the education system. Like, I'm about to give the commencement speech at VCU, and I went and visited some of the students, and the things that they were talking about, like they're all having different types of majors, but they're all talking about being creators. They're all talking about building businesses and building brands. And so I think Kickstarter, it's important for Kickstarter to really embrace that, because I think that space is widening, and also they need the tools to be successful. And that's why when I came into Kickstarter, I was like, I want us to be more than a crowdfunding platform. I want us to be a true power player in the creator economy. And so we built tools not only just for crowdfunding, but before you launch a business, and now after you launch a product, post-campaign tools, fulfillment tools, et cetera. So we want to be that kind of all-in-one place for creators when they're launching new products and new businesses.
Well, there's a few things. I think first, of course, we need to help them grow to become a global leader. And when you start in Paris or Berlin, it's not necessarily easy to figure out how am I going to attack the international markets. Should I, if I start in Paris, should I go to Germany after, or the UK, or should I go to the US? If I go to the US, it's a different way of doing business. And we have had the chance to be on the side of companies that have done that expansion. And so we can help them recruit the right people, put in place the right model from a legal standpoint, from a organization design standpoint, and so on and so forth. So we do that, of course. The other thing is, the one thing that is particular to Bolton, which is we have recognized over the few decades that we've been in operation that the journey of an entrepreneur is a very difficult one, is a hard one, and about half of the entrepreneurs end up doing a burnout. And if they do a burnout, a full one, because it's too much pressure, they have to work really, really hard. And I think the concept so far has been, well, if you want to succeed, if you want to be a great entrepreneur, you need to work 24/7. And the reality is you can't, right? And if you think, the way we think about entrepreneurs is the same way we've been thinking about professional athletes. If you think of professional athlete, you don't say you have to play or compete all day, all night. You have to sleep well. You have to feed yourself well. You have to have good mental health. So you have to have coaching and all this. So we've built basically a well-being and performance program for founders, where we have a group of doctors around them who work on their fitness, on their sleep, on their nutrition. We have leadership development. We have peer support through CEO forums, and so and we have this whole ecosystem that we build, and the entrepreneurs love it because suddenly they feel that they have an actual support system around them.
It's evolving. So Kickstarter is the only major tech company with a wall-to-wall union. So our company unionized in 2020. Before I was there, I didn't screw that one up. And then also we have a 4-day work week, also before my time. And so we have a very unique way in which we work. We're also fully remote. We just sold our office. And so we have a fully remote team all across the US, Canada, China, Europe, et cetera.
So is that 4-day week sort of helping avoid burnout in your own team?
I think it's really dependent on the person and how they manage their time. I think actually a 4-day work week, if you don't manage it well, can burn you out even more because you're trying to fit so much more in a condensed week, where you need that Friday or that 5th day because it's so exhausting. I work 7 days a week. I can't really tell the difference. But I think it just really depends on the person.
But very importantly, once you think about this, not as those very large, highly expensive, large language models, which all of us talk about and use, from Gemini and others, but it's really the focus of that kind of analytical capability on smaller sectors, industry-specific, company-specific. And I think it can actually be for many small and medium-sized companies and startups, such as ones that we do at Red Cell, a real game changer. You can define what your company is and make your company differentiated from many others in the marketplace. Again, I can speak to the companies that we as Red Cell have started. So we've got one that's called DEFCON AI, and it is doing what's called contested logistics for the Department of Defense. And I think it's really, setting itself apart from others. And there'll be a number also in healthcare as well that we are doing. So Semafor AI is another one. So there are a number of companies that I know personally that I think are using AI in a way that differentiates them from others.
What do you
I think there are the obvious things, which are, we use AI internally now to help our customer support team be more effective. It hasn't, and we've hired fewer people in customer support, but they do a better job. We use it in our finance team to be able to predict when a customer is going to pay late, or when churn might happen, or when someone might be ready to upgrade. And I think everyone is going to find those sorts of areas. The place where I think there's the biggest risk and maybe the biggest opportunity is that AI is going to change the user interface of the internet and the web, how we've all experienced it. Today, the business model of the web, what's sat behind it, really is based on search. You search for something, you go there, and then when you're there, whether it's Semafor or any publisher or applications out there, you're able to then derive value from that, whether it's monetary value by selling subscriptions or posting ads, or just ego, right? You know that someone is reading these things. That is changing. We've already seen that change in relatively mild ways. And the best stat of this is 10 years ago, for every visitor that Google would send to you, they would crawl 2 pages. So the ratio was 2 pages crawled to 1 visitor. Today, the crawl rate has stayed exactly the same, but it's now 6 to 1. So what's changed? Change is that Google now answers 75% of the queries that they get without you having to leave Google. So you don't have to go to those 10 blue links and click to the original source. You're getting the answer directly on Google. And that's made it much harder for any original content creators that are monetizing through subscriptions or ads or anything like that. That's the good news. If you look at OpenAI, the ratio is 250 to 1. If you look at Anthropic, it's 6,000 to 1. And so if original content creators are struggling at 6 to 1, I think there has to be a new business model that exists for those original content creators if we're going to be in a world where more and more questions are getting answered without you having to go to the original source. And I think that is incredibly terrifying to a lot of the publishing industry today. But I think that there's an opportunity to create sort of this new wave of value that original content creators are out there creating. I live in Brook City, Utah. It matters to me enormously whether it snows more on the east side of the mountain or the west side. So I subscribe to a weather forecaster who will give me that precise data. If that's coming to AI, then that forecaster can now start to actually sell that data to the various AI models so that I can then ask it, where should I go skiing this morning? And it would tell me one side of the mountain versus the other. So be a reemergence of this niche technology, this niche content creation. But we need something which is a different model than search. And I think that's both the most terrifying thing that's going on in AI right now, and also maybe the most exciting opportunity. So utopian vision for the future is humans should get back to getting content for free and robots should pay a ton.
Interesting.
Going to be, and we should all just prepare ourselves. There's going to be a huge sort of wave of horrible headlines over the course of the next 24 months. Families that lose their life savings because it sounded like their daughter called them from a Mexican prison and said, you need to wire $1 million or I'm not getting out. The number of like my elderly parents who get tricked into revealing some secret because someone who sounded like they were from their bank called up and knew a lot about them. AI is going to make that a scammer's jobs easier. And again, I think that those are going to be horrible headlines. And it does create some risk that anywhere that we have relied on someone sounding a certain way or looking a certain way in order to prove their identity, that's going to break down. But it's that at the end of the day, again, we're in the cybersecurity space. My job at some level is to scare you into buying our products. But I think that that's actually, those headlines are going to be the exception, not the rule. I think over time, AI actually is going to make the web, make the internet more secure. And we see that every day. Our machine learning systems, we don't have the arrogance to call them AI, but our machine learning systems take the feed of data of all of the traffic that flows through Cloudflare's network and are now surfacing new cyber attacks as threats that no human has ever identified before. And that ability for us to use an enormous amount of data, process it incredibly quickly, and actually turn that around and make the internet more secure as a result, I think is again, it's going to sound really scary in the short term, but over the long term, I think we're actually going to have a much more secure internet.
Is luckily we're pretty well trained to identify those things, and so we are able to. We had a North Korean asset apply for a job once. We found out, and they were based in South Korea, and so it's not like it wasn't that obvious. It took us a minute. And we found out later that the person didn't make it through our interview process, but worked for another company and got outed, basically. And so that can happen. And actually, quite frankly, similarly, and just to give it a more, I don't know if it's a fun thing, but honeypotting also starts to happen a lot with apps like Telegram and WhatsApp and stuff, where
individuals will be, and unfortunately mostly men, because men tend to be very susceptible to this thing, where somebody's like, hey, oh, I read your profile, you sound really smart, can we talk? And people start building these relationships online. And there was actually a great economist series called Scamming that talks about that phenomena. And so I think those kind of things are also going to be really, really interesting. And so you really have to train your staff about, like, you know, when something's too good to be true, it probably is. Like, really be careful who you share information with, and any information, really. And so the other thing is that we see all the time is that people will get phone calls or text messages that look like they're from me, asking them to do things like wire things somewhere, or so we gotta, but they're getting very sophisticated. So early on, it was just a text message from a different number, right? It's like, okay, well, easy, right? But on the messaging apps, it looks like it's my Telegram account, for example, messaging you, telling you to do something, and then it gets a little more, oh, is this real or not? And then the next thing is that now they have AI voice agents, so you get all these robocalls all the time, and so they can actually give you a call and it'll sound like I'm talking. And so then it gets really hard. And so I don't even know where this ends, quite frankly. I'm not even sure about it.
The other twist that we also see on that is they will pretend to be with an organization and they will try to lure your employees and say, look, I've got a great job. I think you're a perfect fit for it. They'll kind of know what the average salary is and they'll say, look, I'll add another $100,000 to that. So it becomes really attractive to luring some of your people away. And whether they get the job or not, usually what they're trying to do is get information out of the interview process. So tell me, how familiar are you with this kind of technology? How do you do security? Give me an example. Give me a use case of something you've done. A lot of people very excited to show off their skills, reveal more information than they should, which may be all the threat actor actually needs.
Then the threat of new entrants that you talked about is always there, right? We saw it in the e-commerce world, we saw it. But all those entrants eventually cause the change that we're all looking for here. And there are two ways those changes can happen. Those new entrants can become big scale players, right? Eventually, that's what their aspiration is. Or, and we are starting to see the presence of this in the Fortune 1000. There's a big need to drive the innovation very different. Right? So if you look at traditional Fortune 1000s, they can organically drive some of the innovation. But you can look at some of these upstarts as a way to kind of amplify your innovation. And what is interesting is we are starting to see that trend happening as well. So the scale players are looking at these startups as a way of amplifying their innovation. And it will break the deals window we've been kind of going through to drive the change that we are looking at.
Exciting. It's certainly an exciting thing to a lot of organizations.
Yeah. So first of all, people conflate agents with automation. We spend a lot of time saying, if you just needed to automate, you had techniques in the past. An agent, by its very nature, is it can think, it has cognitive, it can make decisions. So when you start thinking about what the agentic model do, it's you start taking components that allow you to work in a superhuman capability. Making comparison. But if you had a high productivity employee, how can you make a workforce operate in very smart? How do you create high-performing teams that are not wrestling to solve basic problems? And that's kind of where the agent powers up and amplifies. And I was in exchange with about 20 executives yesterday on this AI topic, and I had the funniest moment on agents. Because one of the C-suite who reports to the CEO, she tells the CEO at one point of time, saying, hey, why do you keep asking for this information? Why don't you go figure this out yourself and create an agent? Because this is just not something, productive. And actually that allowed the CEO to work differently through an executive agent that the CEO now uses to get through some basic information that is important to them.
Solidification kind of foundations of the AI trade and rather than the foundations of technology, investment, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And the only two things, so that's the financial side, and then the only two things that happened on the compute side of the market, which is where I sit, was the first thing that happened was the price for spot computing, right? which is just went through the roof. Right? Demand for that was probably driven more by people trying to get onto DeepSeek and try it, see what it does and how it works. But there was a massive run up in that. And then the second piece of it was my phone blew up, where my clients, who are the people that are building these models, the people that are serving inference across the space, the only thing they wanted was, how do I get more infrastructure? How do I get it faster? How do we pull it in? How do we build bigger? When can we build it? And I'm just sitting there going, watching the market kind of lose its mind and struggling to reconcile that with what's going on. And I feel like that kind of asymmetric response right now exists throughout the market, right? Where, somebody shows up and says, one of the hyperscalers is shutting down 3 GPUs in a data center in northern Norway, and the market flips out. And they're missing the thematic power of more compute, sooner, more powerful, larger fabrics at gargantuan scale.
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because it's one of the questions I have about.
So we don't look at that, right? Like, we look at it as we're building out this part of the business, which is structured in nature, because the primary driver for us is to get large, to get to scale, is to get to the public markets, to become investment grade, to drive down our borrowing costs, to prepare the company to be able to compete after markets do what they do, which will be to allow the space to exit what has been a period of disequilibrium in GPU computing infrastructure, right? ChatGPT came into existence, and it was the shock load that occurred that caused the entire computing market to be out of balance. That allowed a company like CoreWeave to emerge. What we're doing with that opportunity is we are focused on becoming as large as possible, so that we have the momentum and scale and technology, so that when this period of disequilibrium subsides, we are able to compress the spread between our borrowing costs and the borrowing costs of the hyperscalers, so that we will be able to effectively compete on the quality of our infrastructure, on the quality of the solutions that we provide with our software, in their ability to stand up and deliver infrastructure so much more effectively.
When you have
when you get to the fundamental kind of value proposition of CoreWeave, what we have built is a specialized cloud that is built to deliver the data centers, the computing infrastructure, the software, to allow companies to run artificial intelligence in the most effective and performant configuration possible. So if they're melting GPUs, they're melting GPUs in suboptimal environments. We melt GPUs. We really have built from the ground up to deliver computing infrastructure to an enormous market that's growing at a staggering rate, what we consider to be the optimal solution, right? And the way we think about it is the hyperscalers that built their cloud infrastructure, the architecture of that was built 25 years ago, and they built a minivan, and that minivan is incredible, right? It allows you to store photos, it allows you to serve SaaS applications, it allows you to do all these amazing things. When I think about it with minivan, it's like, get your kids to soccer practice, go to the supermarket, get your roommates mattress across town, whatever you do, right? We didn't build them. What we did is we said, okay, first principles. Every single decision that we're going to make is going to be based on this new type of compute, this parallelized computing, which is a different approach to computing. It has fundamentally different requirements than what the cloud was built to do. When you build something specifically to solve that problem, you build a Lamborghini, you build a speed vehicle
that is capable of serving that in an incredibly effective way.
So your category that we think about in terms of exposure to is really the battery side of the equation. Still largely a Chinese-dominated supply chain, though not exclusively. And we'd expect with tariff actions like we see that supply chain is also relatively fluid and dynamic and can relocate itself predominantly outside of China, maybe to Southeast Asia, maybe as far as the United States. If we had some tariff and trade certainty, I think you'd see more manufacturing realistically.
And I think the battery situation is really interesting because that's very closely linked to
industry to bring down. We keep a lot of electricity in backup forms of backup generation to make sure that when the sun shines, it gets hot, we have load swings, that we have generation to serve that. And batteries have long been a goal of the industry to sort of level out that need. It is an enabler of renewables because you don't always need the electricity when the wind blows and the sun shines, and you want to store it. But storage is something we've been working on as an industry, and we've been thinking about as the holy grail for decades. We've gotten really advanced in lithium ion over the last half a decade or so, largely driven by the needs for electric vehicles. But the beauty of lithium ion is it's got a high energy density, and it's great for batteries and phones and cars. We actually don't need that kind of energy density on the grid. We have plenty of real estate to put batteries on. We're actually working on a new technology. It's an iron oxide battery made by Form Energy that is domestically manufactured. It's 100 hours in duration. And looks to be a great asset category for us as a company and electric companies across the world to really step into if we can make this technology work effectively. The executive orders recognize the fact that the country needs as much electricity as we can get right now. We're in a growth period, and we're looking to solve that as quickly as possible on behalf of our customers. We serve, all the hyperscaler data centers. We serve guys like CoreWeave, Mike was on in front of me, as customers in very large electric loads and growing with a almost insatiable demand. I think the polios are a short-term potential benefit. Longer term, these are 50, 60-year-old assets anyway. We've got newer forms of generation and more cost-effective forms of generation. We have wind, we have solar, we have storage. Long-term, we'd like to see more nuclear energy deployed in the United States. I'm a recovering nuclear engineer and an ex-Navy guy. And I'd like to see more nuclear to replace the existing fleet, which serves almost 20% of our energy today with always available carbon-free energy. And then we've got all this great new technology in nuclear under development, which is probably 5 to 10 years away. So this can serve as a bridge to that. But in the short term, we're going to see more gas, more wind, and more solar because it's available. And in the long term, I think you're going to see new forms of technology, nuclear, geothermal, maybe some storage and sequestration tech, and a continued push into wind and solar.
But not a big renaissance for coal coming from what you can tell.
No, I think we have 40 gigawatts of coal scheduled to shut down in the next half a decade, and we need almost 400 gigawatts of generation. So it scratches the surface, and for a short period of time until we can get, these supply chains for either natural gas or wind or solar storage ramped up to meet the demand that we see on the horizon.
Can you just unpack this, but it's different ways. So we have, of course, we're hiring more people who are experts in generative AI, which is fairly new. Whereas people, here's the thing that we're just looking at. So when we first started out, we operated over 200 countries and territories, which is interesting because there's only about 180 countries in the UN, but we include things like, Puerto Rico, we count separately, so we can build up the number higher. But we do over 40 languages. And back in the day, in 2001, 2002, 2005, we had an incredible number of human translation people around the world. Putting these 40 different languages, all the content, description of a hotel. You want to see it not just in English, but have people in India, Hindi, or whatever part of the world. And then though, technology comes in and you start being able to do it with machine language translations. Not as good as humans, but you don't need quite as many because now the humans are more like checking it, making it a little better. Well, nowadays, you don't need a human. You can make translation better than humans can do pretty much. So what happened to all those people? Those people don't work with us anymore. But we have a lot more technologists. So for us, we have about 25,000 employees around the world. But I'll tell you, it's going to be a very interesting thing. I go away from my industry, go to other industries. Like little things like, let's take, is anybody taking a Waymo taxi? Anybody here? All right, good, okay. Now, obviously, that technology is going to be really good for trucking. And you know how many people are commercial drivers make a living driving a truck in the United States? You may know that number. Number is 3 million approximately. 3 million people. Okay? Now, add on to that, how many millions of people work for Uber or Lyft? And how many people add on are driving something for DoorDash? All of those jobs are extremely not at risk, will be going away. Okay? That's obvious. I mean, you don't need to be a genius or have this incredible, crystal ball. You're in the Waymo. You know that this is not far away. Or maybe you'll see a drone delivery instead of a DoorDash deliverer. So now we're talking millions of jobs. Millions. What is going to happen? And we've seen this before, obviously. I mean, you and I are doing this.
Does a company have any responsibility for this sort of moral quandary, or is it just the government's problem?
It's interesting about that because in today's market economy, even if I felt it is our responsibility, I cannot do something because my competitors aren't doing it. So we end up with a difference between the companies and the shareholders. They're not going to say, oh, Glenn, you're doing good work. It's very nice. You're helping out society. They're going to say, your return is not nearly what your competitors is. So please, we're going to replace you with someone else. So that's why you really do need a government to put out the rules, the guardrails that we all play by the same rules. But here's the thing. We see these changes before in technology, right? We understand the story of the Luddites and Northern England and the wool, the weaving, and they went rioting and all that. We know that story. And we know where America went from rural to urban, but that took a long time. Now we're having this time in a very, very short number of years. And that, you have a societal thing where things can break. So what we need, I absolutely believe we need leadership at the very top levels to understand how we come up with ways to make this change, which is not stoppable. You cannot stop this technological change. But make it so that we have a
the public sector.
Exactly, absolutely.
So just a quick,
It's all of those things. It's having a vision and then trying to execute it and make it happen. So I believe in our story is that the way you're doing travel right now is incredibly frustrating. I know that because I travel too, and it's a real frustrating experience many times. And you think, why can't this be a better way? And it can be a better way. My vision is that you have in your phone, you have essentially the equivalent of a human travel agent who is always aware of what your needs, wants, desires are, and is always looking out for you. I mean, you think when you're on a holiday with your vacation with your family and you're in a city, I mean, why aren't you getting offers coming to you saying, hi, you got the 2 kids there. Do you know there's this great museum kids would love? It's 3 blocks down the thing and we can give you a great discount. You ever get that? Of course not yet. But that's something that we're going to do. We're even more so. You're going to Amsterdam. Everybody in Amsterdam likes to take the canal. Everybody does that. Everybody pretty much also goes to the Rijksmuseum. Great museum, okay? We get you those tickets. Of course, you can do that. But what's more important is you got the tickets for the canal boat on Thursday. You got the museum on Friday. It's Tuesday. Okay, now the weather forecast, though, we know, it's easy to know it, but we know what the weather's going to, we make a change for you and we tell you, we say, hey, it's going to rain on your canal boat, but, it's going to be sunny on the day you're going to the museum. Why don't we switch this for you? Just press, click, and it's all done for you. That's the type of advice, that's what you want, and much more so. How many times you get the little notice like, your plane is delayed 3 hours? That's not very helpful, okay? That's really not helpful when you're already at the airport. What would be helpful is that it's going to be delayed 3 hours, but we can get you on another flight of a different carrier. Because the carrier that you're delayed, they're not going to be offering up to go on to the other one, right? We can switch that for you, and it will only be an extra $25.
But Glenn, those are amazing visions.
Yeah. The 25,000 people in our company excited to make it happen. I haven't coded for a living since 1985, okay? And I don't even know what to do now. I can't do that for what I can do. My sole real job, my biggest job is the idea and then make people enthusiastic that they will go out and take that hill to death. And that's what people think.
It's a cultural thing.
It absolutely culture, right? Doesn't culture eat strategies now?
Yes. So I want to switch gears a bit.
Not just creates a massive amount of message traffic, but why that's important is really to understand that the inner workings of the markets, the inner workings of the financial system have really worked really well. The resilience of the U.S. market structure, the U.S. and the market infrastructure has been incredibly resilient through this period of time. And I think that's something where people don't really think about it, but it is such an important part of making sure that as investors are changing their positions and as they're managing through all the news, that they can do that instantaneously with in a frictionless environment. I think the entire industry's done well, and of course, I think Nasdaq's done well. Well, at the end of the day, what investors look for is some level of predictability. And anytime you have a period of time where there's not a lot of predictability, the first instinct of an investor is to go risk off and to kind of take money off the table, sit on the sidelines, try to understand what's going to happen, and then start to redeploy their capital in a smart way into those companies or sectors where they think, okay, this is going to be resilient. This actually could be a really interesting sector to get into. This, maybe I'll stay away for a while. But that takes time. And usually it's like this moment. It's like at the beginning of COVID, you saw a massive reduction of risk at the very beginning of COVID. And then you saw monetary action happen. And that allowed people to say, okay, wait, I think this is actually could be an interesting period of time. Not every company is going to be affected the same way. So let me start to redeploy my capital into it. But it became a little bit, I would say, a little bit more of a known environment when everyone realized we could actually operate really successfully remotely. We could figure out the world around us. I think right now we're in that midst of what is the world going to look like? What is this going to mean for rates? How are we going to be able to operate in this world? Where are the demands? Where's the demand? How's the demand going to change? And none of that is yet known. And so that is where we're in that kind of swirl right now, where investors are just trying to get to a point of predictability. Predictability is what really drives the economy forward. And so, yes, there's moments in time when this activity level can be, beneficial to market operators. But at the end of the day, I think we all prefer a world where we have predictability. Well, I would look at it this way. It's quite insidious, like the way that they can try to gain entry to your life, try to kind of pull on your heartstrings. So, the ones that are just, there's so many terribles that you see within the world of financial crime. But the ability to trick a person by using, let's say, an elderly person who's recently lost his spouse. They're lonely and they're afraid, and the obituary was in the news, right? So unfortunately, they are an incredible target for scammers, and so they then oftentimes they're not as technology savvy, and so they can kind of get they can get targeted in a way that's really, it's just terrible to see. What's really great though is you hear great stories. Actually, you do hear great stories from the banks where they teach their tellers. Just if someone is coming and suddenly wanting to make a major withdrawal, they have been taught, do not allow that to happen until you ask like 100 questions. I mean, and maybe for you all, as you're going to the bank and trying to make an unusual withdrawal, you're like, gosh, why are they asking me so many questions? But they're doing it for all the right reasons. But that's the kind of thing, that the training that happens on the ground. But it also has to be behind the scenes. When that wire comes in, we have to be able to stop that wire. We have to be able to make sure that at the end of the day, systematically, we're also able to block those types of bad transactions and make sure that these criminals just are not successful.
I think the major change that we saw right in the 70s and 80s is we lost that focus that we had of funding for the Cold War. And that meant that the space industry had to recover from that loss of initial government investment focus. It took us a little while to find a sustainable set of business cases that could actually close in orbit. And now what's happening is the cost to get to space, thanks to public-private partnership, like the government helping SpaceX get started, that has brought the costs down so low that a whole new business application layer, those business cases actually close. What that's allowed us to do is have satellites make money from orbit by taking pictures of Walmart's parking lot and telling them how many cars are in their parking lots all around the world, or selling data, about rising tides to insurance companies. There's all of this opportunity now to use space in an economic way that is providing a more stable economy, and then allows folks like us at MIT to say, okay, what's the next step? Can we build the platforms, the space habitats, not just for tourism, but for really scaling up science and achieving orbit? And that's what we're getting to now that we have this, I would say, a healthier ecosystem of not just Cold War funding, but a mix of government investment, public-private partnership, and now a really thriving, self-sustaining space.
That have been born in this environment, they generally reach profitability a lot quicker. Their capital needs look different, but they're ones that really transform the value proposition for their end customer. There are also businesses that can be transformed leveraging AI. These are not native businesses, but businesses that today may be considered as a legacy platform, but can really transform their ability to deliver against the customer value proposition, leveraging the technology. So our view is that whether you're a bear or a bull, and I've said this when I spoke to some of your colleagues in Davos earlier in the year, whether you're bullish or bearish in the space, you're still looking at capital formation to the tune of trillions of dollars, right? And so, yes, on an absolute basis, something like the AI infrastructure partnership that we've put together has a large capital formation capacity, but on a relative basis, compared to the need, it's still a drop in the water. Even with some of the news that we're hearing about pullback in capacity and build-out perspective from some of the large hyperscalers, that is still quite small compared to what our view long-term are the compute needs and the capital requirements in order to really enable the adoption of the technology. Do you have any long-term view in terms of the definition of this technology? So you can't, the current environment is the current environment today, but we know what the need is if you take the 5 to 10 year view, and we need to make sure we're building to continue driving the United States that edge, that leading edge.
What does, MGX, you go out, like, and you invest money, you get a return, that's a great portion of it, but is there something else that's going to be, a benefit to Abu Dhabi and to kind of bringing talent, technology, and tech there? Is that a portion of your mandate?
I think it's a piece of the mandate, absolutely. We're looking at advancing Abu Dhabi's role in artificial intelligence more broadly, whether it's from the tech development perspective, also ensuring that there are platform leaders that we can support, targeting geographies that don't have current capabilities today. I'm thinking about, for instance, our data center platform, Tesla, which is a great candidate that can really target data center compute build out in the global south. So it is important. That is an important part of our mandate. But ultimately, we are an investor. We are driven by generating financial returns, and we're assessed as such.
Which all of us experience every day with everything that's going on, and enterprise AI. Now, there's enormous potential in what large enterprises can do with AI. Some of the constraints. One, there needs to be a clear way to demonstrate benefit at scale across the company. Most of these companies are built from acquisitions, and so there are various components to these companies, not a uniform set of structures that allow AI to be deployed. Many things that we do with AI in companies need a strong data infrastructure. And most companies don't have that. They have good data infrastructure for data that's within the company, but a lot of the unstructured data, consumer sentiment, it's not easily captured by these companies. What really needs to happen for scale to come into play is make sure that the AI capabilities that companies are driving, let's say, for example, in customer service, are capabilities that can be applied in each area of that company and not just in one part of it. The promise that has been made by many external providers, many technology companies for AI sometimes is not reflected because many of the implementation blocks, many of the implementation impediments come into play with different divisions, different compartments of a company and not allowing the scaling to happen that effect. So those are some of the constraints that we are seeing. One of the ways that we want to make sure are you already seeing that have started with AI being part of everything that is growing up, and those are typically startups that have grown up very well.
Any examples of legacy companies that have been able to do it that, to inject it more deeply and natively?
So there are some examples. We are working with 400 different clients on AI. There's a telco here in the US which have basically put an AI infrastructure across their whole company, not just in one part of it, which is working very well. There's a large accounting firm where they basically use agents. Agents are things within AI that are starting to work extremely well. Agents across the audit process.
Is the ROI close to immediate?
It's substantial, but there is a time lag to it. So maybe within about 9 months or so, the benefits for this specific example came through. But the benefits are substantial because a lot of the work that they were driving through with their junior staff is now being driven through these agents.
So why are some companies going all in so quickly, and if it's such a quick, rapid, positive return? Why isn't every capable CEO doing this?
So almost everyone is now jumping in to do something with it. So there's no discussion that we have with any client that does not involve AI. The constraint really is more on what the expectation is. So take the area of customer service. There we see clients getting benefits of 30, 40% in terms of productivity, but they also get increased capability in service because there are problems that they can address which were not previously being addressed because of the ability to intelligently mine all of that data. You look at things like credit risk assessment, and we have clients which are doing that, much better ability to drive credit risk assessment. We're working with clients on drug discovery. Again, they're much faster return in terms of the time spent on clinical trials. So there are examples which are specific to different industries.
The ads and commerce teams at Google for over 5 years and intimately familiar with search advertising, ran the travel and shopping teams and so on. And it's fascinating to see how rapidly it's evolving. One of the worst kept secrets on the internet is that OpenAI ChatGPT has, I think, 800 million something users and growing at multiple percentage points every week, which is what I think it'll be one of the fastest billion user products in the world ever. I think it just reflects the fact that none of us likes wading through a series of links or clicking around to get an answer. And ChatGPT's model, especially when it's backed with search, so you don't have to worry about things like hallucinations, of giving you an answer. Anytime I want to look up information about a company, Salil was here just now, if I want to know a quick summary about Infosys, the stock and the company, I just ask that in ChatGPT. I think more and more of these kinds of simple questions are going to be answered by the likes of ChatGPT. I think there's something interesting happening on the other side as well, and I've spoken about it. I'm sure all of you don't particularly like shopping on the internet. It's just really hard. Something as simple as buying airline tickets, you have to go to multiple sites, figure out, compare, and buying other things like shoes and so on. It's a true pain. But I don't think we're that far away from a moment in which we can roughly describe what it is you're looking for. And you can have agents that can do a pretty good job of running searches on your behalf, assembling reports. It's early for this kind of stuff, but you can already see the genius behind things like deep research, which I use a lot for doing in-depth research with stuff. And so I think search is under attack, both on one of those situations in which you need to embrace and win and not worry about business model. This is the reason why established companies struggle to innovate, because they try to answer questions like that out of the gate. At this point, it is existential for Google to be relevant in the world of search. The money will come. People will figure stuff out. I can go back to my own history at Google when, first of all, desktop search had flattened out. PC sales, flat as a pancake, 2008, 9, it just stopped. And so our query growth, none. And mobile was just then coming along. And it made 1/10 the money that desktop search did. And yet it was the only place that had any amount of growth. But Google's genius then was that they created Apple. We cut the deal with Apple to power search and search advertising. We captured the market. And then my team went through a 5-year grind of increasing RPMs, the money that we make on mobile query, from the 10% much closer to the 100%. And so I think like it is really important to internalize that. My funny way of saying this to my team at Google would be, it is way better to have a very large business with bad margins than to have a very small business with amazing margins. I think that's what's going to happen with AI as well. These lessons keep coming back again and again. Big, complicated topics. And I'm a big fan of history when it comes to these kinds of areas. We go through cycles. And I think we went through a cycle of thinking that antitrust is completely useless and it should have no purpose whatsoever, to saying perhaps there is such a thing as too big. My very high level take is that companies should not approach the size of countries. Why? Because they are unitary in nature. They are profit maximizing. They're not for any kind of social good. I'm not saying anything dramatic here. That's the construct of a company. And so that's the bar that we should have when we think about what does antitrust mean for us as a nation. There's a bunch of stuff. There's way smarter people than I am that are going to think through these topics. Off the chain of abstraction. What I mean by that is talking to a chatbot and getting a compact answer for something that is also correct is way better than having to click through a bunch of things. Similarly, asking a question and getting a quantitative answer. How much revenue did so-and-so company make yesterday? Is it going up? Is it going down? What's the trend? To me, is a step forward from having to wait through a bunch of search results or go to a dashboard to get at the same thing. But we do compound things all the time, meaning we are going to read some piece of news. We are going to look at how did a stock perform or how did this particular customer do as we get ready for a conversation. We are now creating systems at Snowflake that can begin to address some of these. Hey, look at 3 or 4 different data sources. Assemble answers for me that will get me ready to be able to do something. The next logical step is if something is wrong or something is going exceptionally well, what are the reasons for that happening? Your revenue went up. Is it in a particular region? Did it go down because it was Easter in Europe last week? It's those next steps. So to me, progress is going to get made in terms of what are more and more complicated things. We have customers, we have insurance customers that routinely do underwrite things like these buildings. And it's a multi-week project for them to look through the hundreds of PDF documents that they will get about every aspect of this building before they can decide whether they should underwrite something or not. I think that can get accelerated to a matter of hours, where a lot of the drudge work is automated. It'll be human guided. It's not the case that all of a sudden, a system can run a business. But as we walk up this chain of abstraction, you get more and more value out of it.
Well, I'm looking for while a Waymo is absolutely there, some of the competition is starting to get there as well. There's a lot more to autonomous that needs to happen in order for it to happen at scale. You need a consistent regulatory environment, and the DOT, for example, released a position that I think is a very good position, makes sense, create some consistency on a national basis. We're very much for that. You need on-the-ground operations, right? You need depots and cleaning and recharging, et cetera, to operate these cars on a local basis. You need affordable hardware costs. Right now, these cars cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've got to bring them down to tens of thousands of dollars. And last but not least, you've got to drive utilization of these cars, because this is incredibly expensive technology, incredibly expensive vehicles that you've got to make profitable over a period of time. So we essentially are helping the ecosystem amongst all 5 of those needs. And really, just like we want the best and safest human drivers on our platform on Uber, we want the best and safest robot drivers on our platform. If you're in Austin and you took an Uber and Waymo showed up. So right now in Austin, if you choose an Uber, you will get dispatched sometimes with Waymo. Same will be true in Atlanta and in other cities. You will see the same.
And for me, I definitely can Uber driver. a temporary phenomenon?
So I think if you fast forward 15, 20 years, I think eventually the cars are going to be autonomous. And that's not just true in Uber. I think generally on the road, there's very strong evidence to believe that robot drivers are going to be safer than human drivers. They're not going to get distracted. They're not going to get texted, et cetera. And basically the software is learning, is getting retrained every single day based on the world as it is. So they will be safer, right? And there are more than 30,000 fatalities, automotive fatalities in the US every year. Around the world, it's more than 1 million.
How many like robot fatalities? Like, I think there's a belief that people are more comfortable with human created fatalities than if a robot kills you, even if that's irrational. What do you have in your head a ratio? Like, do you have to be 5 times safer, 10 times safer?
I think it's gotta be approaching the 10x safer. Humans understand that humans are fallible. They're not okay with software, in the world of AI being fallible. Yeah. Certainly, these mistakes happen on the road. So I do think that superhuman safety is an absolute prerogative in the business. I don't think that there will be a winner take all. The drama is winner take all, but I think that the transportation industry is $1 trillion+ industry. You could argue that rideshare is going to be finally beat personal car ownership in a world where you've got robots driving all over the place. So I think there'll be plenty of room in the industry. We'd love to work with them. But I do think you're going to have multiple players. Some of them are going to go direct, and some of them are going to go through networks like ours.
Do you have
Yeah.
What is that?
I have a Tesla.
Have you tried full self-driving?
Yes.
What do you think of it?
It is delightful, but I have to take over every once in a while. It is an absolutely great product. And again, the car's a terrific car.
And Tesla, a bit of a meme stock, has been trading between like $200 and $450 a share for a while now.
I'm not a Wall Street.
Quite up and down, but if what you say is true, that basically ultimately cars are cars, that it's kind of a tough business. At what price point would you buy a share of Tesla?
I have no idea. I own the car. I don't need to.
But by your theory, that company is wildly. Is that what you believe?
No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there won't be a winner take all. The market is too large.
They're valued as though they're.
I think that they're valued based on both autonomous and robotics, etc. But I'll leave up to the Wall Street analysts to value.
There is this sense that Elon is like pivoting hard from cars to robots. He's got a little bored with cars. Would you encourage that?
I don't know. I can't speak to whether he's getting bored with cars, but the OEM business, the traditional car manufacturing business is a really, really tough business. In order to achieve scale, you really need to sell globally. And if you're going to sell globally, you're going to have to compete with the Chinese auto manufacturers. And the Chinese auto manufacturing sector has made extraordinary advances over the past 5 to 10 years. We've announced a partnership with WeRide. We have WeRide, which is an autonomous player, terrific team. We offer WeRides now in Abu Dhabi, and we announced an expansion into Dubai as well. But if you're just a traditional manufacturer of cars, you will have a very, very tough time, and especially EVs, you will have a very difficult time competing against the Chinese EV manufacturers.
There is a sense from anybody who comes back from China anywhere near that business. I think the U.S. car industry, the technical term you hear used often is cooked. Is that your impression? Like, are we going to be France, where maybe we can get some people to drive Peugeots and Renaults domestically, but basically it's over? Or are we the Soviet Union, where we have to drive a Lada?
I think right now, especially as it relates to EVs, right? Almost 50% of Chinese cars sold are EVs.
Yeah.
The scale that they've achieved, the quality that they've achieved, the battery technology is ahead of what I've seen in the U.S. Doesn't mean the U.S. can't catch up. Never count out the U.S. But right now, the competition in EVs is extraordinary. Right now, the Chinese will.
Do you think that these tariff policies, as proposed, can help the U.S. catch up? Or are they going to be effective?
Well, I think tariffs in some ways are designed to protect local manufacturers, right? The issue with tariffs is that sometimes that protection removes the need for vicious competition. And vicious competition is like, that is what gets you to be best of breed. So if the tariff policy results in companies who have it easier and rest on their laurels, no, it's not going to work. You know, that you will have, you know, call it a Peugeot, et cetera. I've got more faith in our U.S. OEM partners than that. So I'm hopeful that they can use this opportunity to push to be as competitive as we expect the U.S. manufacturing sector to be globally. The next year, we will have hundreds of Waymos available on Uber, and it's just a great experience. It's a delightful experience. You felt it yourself. In Atlanta, there will be hundreds of Waymos as well, but the expansion really depends on the local regulatory framework. And right now, I'd say California and Texas are the most open markets. So
and you don't anticipate the feds totally steamrolling the local, sort of overriding.
I don't think so. That there are certain, as it relates to manufacturing standards, I think it's entirely appropriate for the federal government to step in. But you know, I think local regulations of what these cities and states expect on their street, I think that should stay local.
More than things like IT development, R&D, and the skills of their employees, which is the practice of management. In fact, even the head of UPenn's Generative AI Center, Ethan Mollick, he came out with a new book recently called Co-Intelligence. I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. He has this moment where it's almost like he digresses and he goes, oh yeah, I used to do this research on a topic that a lot of people think is boring, which is on management. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. And he said, I looked at the sales of video games, and the one thing that accounted for 20% of the variance in video game sales was managers. And it was even more important than who the executives were and who designed the video game. Think about that. Yet it gets totally unnoticed. So, you know, with so many of these executives that are dying for increased productivity gains, you know, you hear some executives musing about the idea that they want their own Doge departments, when the real productivity already exists in the human intelligence that they already have, but they're not fully optimizing it, and yet they can. And it's through management. So we were inspired because we saw this study in the UK. Somebody went out and interviewed managers and said, have you ever been trained on the very basic principles of management? And a huge majority go, no, not at all. And we're like, wow, that's amazing. What if we pose that question to the entire world? So as part of our Gallup World Poll, we went to 140 countries, 2/3 of the world, we do face-to-face interviews. We literally show up in people's homes. The other 1/3, we call them at their homes. And everyone who identified as a manager, we pose that question to them. Have you ever been trained to do this? 56% of managers said, I've never been trained on what it means to be a manager. Think about that. And so if there's any place to start, go right there. There's a firm, not Gallup. It was published in the Atlantic, and this was in Italy. And they looked at a number of firms, and they went and did training, and they saw the managers that were trained on basic management principles saw an increase in productivity by 49% compared to those who didn't. You know, it's sort of like, how much math do you need to realize the very importance of the practice of management? So I think we would just go so far as to say, step one, train them.
Note to self, take a manager training. Perfect.
Well, I think what's most remarkable is that everybody wants to see more of an embrace of AI because, you know, some of the aspects of work, if it can be automated, it'll be amazing for everyone. But the reality is that while executives think that they have these huge AI rollout plans, employees still aren't using it. So we did a study with CHROs and said, how many of you are actually rolling out AI plans? I think it was 97% said that they've rolled out an extensive AI program. Then we went to employees and said, how many of you use this? Do you know what percent told us never? 67%. And by the way, the many of you in the room that are probably like, oh my gosh, I use it every day. I mean, I'm on it all the time. 4% agree with you. 4%. Now, what's the barrier to getting more AI into organizations? effective managers. Because when we go in and see that when there are well-run teams by managers, they are far more likely to pick up AI in a more rapid and a more responsible way. Think about that. And I'll leave you with this thought too, because isn't it amazing if you think about what it is that you're doing with AI on a daily basis? Is you're effectively your own CEO with agents that report to you. So if you think about it, who were the original prompt engineers? Managers. Managers were arguably humanity's original prompt engineers. Why? Because they were the ones, not to artificial intelligence, but to human intelligence, had to give clear expectations. And now the same thing is required of all of us. If we are to effectively use AI, we must engage in the very basic management principles of just, can we give clear expectations to AI? And by the way, as humanity, we're not great at it. So we ask human beings today, this is the very foundation of what we call engagement. And we say, do you know what's expected of you at work? If we were so awesome at prompt engineering with human intelligence, guess what percent of people say that they can fully agree to what's expected of them at work? Half of all workers globally don't fully know. Think about that. But if we're going to get the real gains from AI, we need to do a lot better, not just at being able to prompt and give clear expectations. We need to be able to give clear expectations to each other to fully optimize not just AI, but the human intelligence that's already existing.
Well, it is probably certainly a hot topic so far this week in with tariffs, and everyone's wondering. I had a lot of questions about bananas. Started stocking up and filling the
coffee as well.
A little bit of coffee, avocados, all that kind of all those hot topics. So we're seeing that now. We're actually in discussions right now with the folks who do have the source from internationally. And as a food solutions company, our objectives are we want to make sure we keep the costs as low as we can, which we need to explore other supply chain options in some cases. We are in some cases going to make choices. There's no bananas that grow in the Dakotas or Minnesota or any of those places. So we are going to wind up with higher costs, and we will make sure we're as transparent about that as possible. But I guess the one thing though, with all the discussion about the economics, it is I think that we have this existential threat right now about people, and I think that to me is for the things like the tariffs will come and go, and there's other issues that we'll deal with. But I'm delighted to participate in this topic today because I think the people equation is so important. It is a great opportunity, and the risk is that we won't have the people we need to run this great economy here. And the U.S. economy is so amazing, it's so resilient. And the ingredient that we need right now is we need people. We have a declining birth rate. We have an immigration policy that's not very well founded. And we need to get more people's hands involved in this marvel of the U.S. economy. And what we're going to talk about today is how we establish competitive advantage by having great people organizations. But that should not be a zero-sum game. We should find a way to have policies where all of us can get more people involved in this marvel of our country. Also, amongst those elements, we have things like, we have, of course, the emails and all those basic tools, but we do every single period. I send out a video to the field organization for them to review as part of the beginning of their meeting. So what's going on in the company, and then we have tools for the supervisor to talk about what's next with their folks. So we actually require that they have regular pulse meetings. They meet with them in some cases. Our distribution center, they meet every single day, and we have the stuff that we add from the top. We do town halls in the field. We have to take questions. We go to our stores, our distribution centers. We do a simulcast town hall recorder for the entire company that we have at our headquarters, and we broadcast that out. We use written tools because people still like to read things that they can hold on to once in a while. It's really cool. And so we have written publications we send out, and a great many others. So we use the term, it's not the most elegant term, but this idea about carpet bombing the organization with communication. We make sure they have all the tools they need, everything they need to know about the company, and I want to treat them like they're SEC insiders. So I want them to feel that they actually know what's going on. And so we work very hard to make sure they have all these various communication tools.
Most important thing that we do for culture, I think, though, and it goes to communication, is we have been very clear that the value creation for our company happens at the customer side. So getting out in the field, there's an expectation for executives to not be in the office all the time. You've got to go visit customers. You've got to go visit team members. Virtually every week, I'm out talking with team members and getting to know their perspectives and creating a culture where they can tell you the truth and tell you what's not working, I think, and then also reacting so nothing bad happens when you hear the truth. is really, really important. So I think we work very hard to create a culture where we're getting feedback from our team members, from customers, the good, the bad, the ugly all the time. And if you can create that environment, it lowers the barriers for people to feel like they can belong. It makes it much easier for people to belong.
Can you give us an example of that? I'm really curious. Like, when was a time when you were, out in the field visiting, people on staff, and they told you, "Hey, DG, this is not working."
Last week, yeah, I was in Carolina. I heard some things about what was going on in one of our facilities that we were working on improving. I actually visited a customer, and it turns out that we had a COVID era restriction on delivery that we removed after the visit because we had forgotten it was still there.
Wow.
And so the customer said, "Why, when we have an emergency, why is it taking 3 hours to get something?" And I kind of scratched my head because it should take 30 minutes. It's pretty easy to do that. And it turns out that we weren't getting product to customers until afternoon because during COVID, we didn't want people coming in the morning. So just an example of getting feedback on what's working.
Yeah.
Generational differences. We study those things. It's important in the way we engage with people. The headline is that those basic fundamentals I mentioned a moment ago are the same for everything. Everyone wants to feel like they belong. Everyone wants to feel like a winner. They want to get feedback. They want to go to the community. Those are those basic fundamentals. And on top of that, you say, well, what are the differences in the current generation versus the folks who led, a few years earlier? And among those, the current generation is much more sensitive about what the company stands for. They want to feel really, really attached to the purpose, more so than the previous generations did. They're increasingly, and interestingly, they're really intensely curious on knowing and seeing a visible leadership team, visible CEO. Much more so than they would have been a generation ago. It matters more to them. I think they're trying to cobble together a sense of, this is what I do. I like this. This purpose makes sense to me. They want to feel that belonging in ways a little bit different than the previous generations. There's also an element of there are, as I mentioned, about the kind of tight supply of talent. Without actually articulating that, people know, and they know they have choices. And so they're also going to be more swift to say, I don't want to be part of this. I'm going to move on. They'll endure fewer hardships if the company doesn't articulate the things that they feel that they value. And so we have to be on our game more because people will leave more quickly because they know there's choices in the marketplace.
GT, what do you think? Generational difference within the work?
I would agree with. I do think that every generation thinks the one behind them is very different. I'm not sure it's ever true. I think at the core, people are people, and I think to the extent that you can create an environment where people understand what you do and why you do it, and they rally against the mission that always works and always has worked. I would say we've seen that particularly in hiring with technology. We are a very big technology player. We're one of the top 20 retailers in the country, which doesn't make sense because we're not even a retail company, but that's true. So we have big technology teams, a lot of the hiring people, and creating an environment there that connects them to the organization and to our purpose has been really important.
Well, guys,
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. The Doge has been learning very, very fast. There's a lot written about. First, I think we forget, right? This is the 4-year term is 460 days. We're 100 days in, so if this was baseball, we're maybe at the bottom of the first. And so I think it is way too early to declare that how things are working and it's working and it's not working. Bottom of the first. I think in a way Doge has already made some significant changes that are probably here to stay. So we've been arguing that there are a number of practices that are inefficient, that our government could do better and that needs to do better. I've been arguing, when I talk about China, about speed. Been arguing that there's too much duplication across the government. The efficiency conversation was always third order, fourth order effect, and now it's at the top of the conversation. And I actually think that's a good thing. The second thing is people are now much more interested in how the government actually works as a result of Doge and how things actually happen and how things get bought and why they get bought and all of that. And I actually think that's super positive. I mean, in functioning democracy, we all need to understand what our tax dollars are being spent on. And so I think all of that is really positive. 4 years is a long time, and it isn't, to change something as significant as the federal government. And so I continue to think at some point you got to pick your spots and decide where you're going to have the biggest impact and go after that first. And I think that's what I hope to see is sort of a focusing on those efforts and the things that will be of most benefit to the American people and to the taxpayer. And the efficiency side, certainly there's a lot of discussion about improper payments and fraud. By the way, all fraud is improper payment, but not all improper payments are fraud. But that's clearly an area of focus. And I go back to duplication, right? I mean, because Congress funds everything by agency and sometimes inside the agency by little piece, there's no incentive to get something great in one place and proliferate it across the government. So for example, right on the public health space, there are 7 different registries that at least we know of, there may be more, that different agencies use to decide, is this a valid doctor to whom I can send a payment? If they send it, and why do we have 7 different lists that are not, by the way, coordinated with each other? And why isn't there a national registry and all of these agencies use? And that's a small example, but when you add it all up, we're tracking something in the order of $20-30 billion a year that could be reduced if you just reduce these duplicative systems. So to me, those are great areas of focus. And then the one that is near and dear to my heart is Doge is right that the federal government is slow in adopting technology. There are still 1,700 plus brick and mortar on-prem data centers spread across the federal government. None of our companies have, if you have one data center left, you're trying hard to get rid of it. So why don't we move all of that to the cloud yesterday? Because it's not just cheaper, but you can't implement AI on a 1950s computer system either. So we're falling further and further behind if we don't make those changes. Sure. So, Zal is the premier leader of AI in the federal government. And we work on AI across the spectrum, from civilian agencies to national security missions, which are about 75% of what we do is national security related. And one of the big issues is, how do you make AI useful at the edge, right? I mean, most commercial technologies are developed on the assumption that you're sitting on this great facility with air conditioning, with perfect amounts of energy, the newest GPUs and the rest. The reality is, if you're a soldier out there, you may have no communications. If you're in space, you have no communications. And so what we've been doing is testing different ways of using large language models and AI in general in these edge cases. Space being a really important one, because autonomy in space is going to be absolutely crucial. So we did a piece of research about 18 months ago where we put the first LLM in the International Space Station on the National Lab side, which was it's essentially an application that can that we've trained on all of the operating manuals of the space station. So an astronaut can say, okay, how do I fix this? As opposed to having to go read through the manuals and everything else. Think of it as like my house, I go to YouTube. In the space station, at least they can go to this. But the challenge with it is that was a text only. Llama is multimodal. Llama is open weights, open source. And so we could tune it to do that much better working with Meta, and that just got deployed. It's pretty cool.
Evolve across the globe. So we have an incredibly distributed workforce where more than half don't go to an office or branch office. We have 1,400 branch offices because they're out serving customers every day, and they're doing it in a very independent, autonomous manner. But we do have, as you can imagine, 17 manufacturing facilities. We are an industrial company, so we've got a manufacturing workforce that's right in the midst of automation changes and in digital thread. And then we have every other skill you can imagine, again, distributed across 1,400 locations, sales, service, all of our finance, as well as our R&D. We have 6 design centers spread across the globe. So no matter where you are, we are the company now for 171 years that has helped to provide the technology that allows cities to rise and to keep everybody safe and moving.
It's great to be here with Judy. It's hard to think of a building without an elevator, right? So there's...
Oh, we need you for the building.
Well, there we are. Symbiotic relationship here. We are part of the same ecosystem, but different parts. So as Judy described, they're part of the actual implementation, and we're at that very front end in the design. And so our workforce, and we're the largest architecture firm in the world, we are in 56 different locations, different cities across the world. You can imagine, architects are needed everywhere. I like to say it's the second oldest profession, but we've always needed places.
Journalism being firm.
But we have, we're the beginning of that kind of creative process, and so we have, over 6,000 creative folks that are working with clients. Literally, we worked with clients in over half the countries of the world, so over 100 countries, where our teams were working with clients to create, whether it's the new building or a stadium or headquarters or retail, but all types of places where people experience life. And really that's the business that we're in, is creating experiences and creating the theater of those experiences all around the world, different cultures, different people, different localities, different regulations, being very local, but also being very global as a community.
That spectrum in between, whether it's a millennial, that are all motivated by different reasons, whether it's purpose, whether it's work-life flexibility, or whether it's independent work. And a challenge I think we have, not just as leaders, but as a society, is trying to create an environment, logically and physically, where everyone can succeed and where you can optimize the workforce to be able to serve customers. So here's what's in common. It's human, it's customer-centric, and in our case is based on our foundations, which we call our absolutes, which are safety, ethics, and quality. And that's where we start. Then we add technology, then we add working together in collaboration and autonomy at different times, but that's really the basic.
Doug said is so important, that culture and those values, really have been a continuum. But I would add to it what has changed. So you try to, think what is different. And I would say the level of candor among people, the kind of, I'd call it the honesty of the conversation about what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's been very healthy. Of course, we all hear the debates of, I don't want to be in the office or I want to be in the office, but in many ways it's created a new level of alignment around, we all want to do great work. We all have these same values, but how are we going to get there knowing what we know today about the benefits of some things that maybe we hadn't done before? And we want to take those forward and maybe challenge some of the things in the past that really didn't provide the value that we all kind of pretended it did. So I think it really opened the door to something much better.
In the workforce that we do have, and also can make these very rewarding jobs, because it's not an assembly line. You're really thinking and working at the same time when you're on the railroad.
Just very, very quickly, in terms of technology, rail cars used to be powered by coal. What do you see in the future where you have hydrogen fuel cells, batteries? How are these
so
running?
today, obviously, they're all diesel, which is very efficient, and we can take a ton of goods 500 miles on 1 gallon of diesel fuel, because we're low friction and not stopping and those kind of things. But the future we think is probably hydrogen, but it's out there a while because of the horsepower we need and the torque we need, and also we have self-contained fueling stations in our yards, so we don't have to worry about the public nature of hydrogen fueling, which has risk to it. We're also testing and we're using hybrid electric diesel trains in our yards in Baltimore, for example, and we're also using biodiesel a lot in Florida. Very successful. We can't get enough of it, but biodiesel has had a lot of success too. So but hydrogen probably is a long-term solution unless we can find. You can't do batteries because you can't get stuck somewhere in the middle of a railroad and try and charge it. You got to be able to have power supply that can be on the locomotive itself.
Yeah, great.
Number one, USA Fax is a project I started when I retired from Microsoft. I had an interest in understanding where the government, not just federal, but also state and local governments, Where do they raise their money? How much comes in taxes from who? What does it get spent on? But of course, government's not a business. The issue then is, and also what kind of outcomes does government get for its money? In fact, we even, for the business people in the audience, we wrote a 10K for government in the United States. As we looked at outcomes and input, specifically in the area of education, it's not hard to see that there are those who might believe that, for example, we have 33% roughly proficiency in math for kids in the 8th grade level. There's some people who probably say that's not good enough. At USA Facts, we don't try to be judgmental, but I think most people probably would say, whoa, we got an issue here. Our federal government spent about $268 billion on the Department of Education last year. We know that from the work we do. 56 billion of it was one-time money, theoretically one-time money left from the COVID funds. And if you look at the rest, it's 3+% of the total federal budget. And 60% almost of that is going directly into loans and scholarships for young people to go to college. And another almost 40% is spent on supplemental money that goes into public schools, affects about half the kids in the country, amounts to another $650 a kid. And those federal funds could be as high in some districts as 80%, in a few districts in New Mexico, or as low as 21% throughout the state of New Hampshire. So we're spending all this money, even though it's only, 3% roughly the total federal budget. But as we look at, is that money working for us in the right way? How do we measure outcomes as opposed to just the inputs in what we spend? There's a few core databases that we use to publish so people can make their own assessments of the quality of education in the country. And I wanted the secretary to know that whatever cuts, whatever reorganization, whatever ever happens with the Department of Education, we need to know, all of us as citizens need to know, is that federal government money working? And the government also pulls together a bunch of data from the states. That data for me, if I ran a state Department of Education, would be fundamental in
capacity for decades. So we've sort of, most of our enriched uranium material for commercial reactors comes from overseas. Now we've got a bunch of small modular reactor companies, some really exciting new technologies. We've got, with the outlook for significant growth in demand for new electricity in the United States, there's interest in building large reactors again, despite the cost overruns at Vogtle. The last ones were built at less cost than the first unit at Vogtle. So I think we would like to see a renaissance of nuclear. Now, I know the renaissance of nuclear has been talked about for a long time. I think the conditions are there, and the administration is going to do everything we can to lean in to help commercial businesses and customers launch nuclear. We are offering up land at Department of Energy facilities for people that want to build things. We're making it easier to test reactors at a demonstration site at the Idaho National Labs. We recently announced supplying HALEU fuel, which is instead of enriched in that 3 to 5% in a typical light water reactor, it's 20% enriched uranium for next generation reactors. We announced delivering that fuel to 5 of these next generation reactor companies. We're also using the Loan Program Office in situations where, for example, hyperscalers so want to see new electric and nuclear generation capacity, they'll put up large chunks of equity money to help, because utilities don't have the balance sheets or the risk tolerance to build nuclear power plants. But if you can have offtake customers that are well capitalized, put up a large amount of equity together with the developers to secure a execution of these projects, LPO office will come in with debt that makes the capital stack work so we can get plants built. Once they get built, contract financing will take out the LPO debt and we can recycle that into other projects. I'd like to not get in the position we're in, for example, with wind power, where the tax subsidies came in 32 years ago and they're still here today. You put subsidies into tax credits, they tend to be very sticky. So what we're doing at the Department of Energy is specific deals that are going to hopefully launch the first 5, 7, 8, 10, 20 reactors, and let's get this industry going again. Then we'll get supply chain efficiencies and volume, costs will come down, and I think it should fly very well as a commercial industry. Say, here's our commercial plan, we're going to build capacity in the United States. We do have grant money to help support that from Congress already. Right. And definitely in the reconciliation bill, we are talking as well about this is an area that I think some catalyzing investment makes sense. And I'm talking now about fission, what we have, but I should also say fusion power. I went to college 40 years ago, fired up to work on fusion energy. It's what powers the stars. And humans are a genius. Of course, we'll figure it out. Now, good thing I didn't stay in that field because we don't have a business of it yet. But I'll tell you, the progress in the state of affairs today is incredibly exciting. At Lawrence Livermore National Labs at the Department of Energy, only a little over 2 years ago, for the first time, we got more energy out of a fusion reaction than put in to light the fuel on fire. Just recently, I don't think we've announced it yet, a much higher multiple of energy out versus energy in. And we've got a number of commercial fusion companies. Definitely in the next several years, we're going to see at scale much more energy come out than goes in fusion devices. It's a little bit of time after that to make it commercial and machines and all that, but it's coming. It's not a maybe someday, always 20 years away thing. Watch the news. Fusion energy in the next 4 years is going to be very exciting. And so we're looking to how can we help catalyze that as well. And it's disturbing to people. It's uncertain because we're in the middle of it. But let me just hit the 2 points about what's the president's plan here? What's the agenda? It's driven by two things. Since the end of World War II, the United States has been incredibly welcoming to import products from all the nations of the world. I celebrate that. The goal of the president is to get all of the nations of the world equally welcoming to American exports as we've been to their exports. That's a grow trade agenda. The other piece of the president's agenda is to try to find the right incentives to reshore manufacturing in the United States. Over the last 25 years, a lot of energy-intensive manufacturing has left the United States. Well, we can buy it cheaper from Asia, people said, so, no big deal. But those jobs, large-scale industrial jobs and energy-intensive manufacturing, they tend to be blue-collar. They're often concentrated in rural areas. This is just the demographic that's had a rough ride in the last 30 years. If you lived in an urban area and you're highly educated, boy, it's been a great few decades. I've been very lucky in my life. But if you grew up in a rural area or a less thriving community and didn't get the same educational opportunity as the rest of us, your economic opportunities have actually gotten worse. The president is deeply committed to make the economic opportunities better for those people, and so he wants an agenda that makes it compelling to invest in the United States and put those jobs here. And the last thing as an energy nerd, can I repeat my thoughts? So manufacturing, people, when we think about energy, people either talk about the electricity grid or they talk about automobiles. And of course, those are important and real uses of energy, and I love the electricity grid. But the energy delivered on the electricity grid to end users represents 20% of total global energy. People think it's like the same thing. It's a piece. It's a sliver. We use about a quarter of energy for transportation. But the biggest use of energy by far is manufacturing, making things. And you can't make an automobile or a building or an internet or an airplane without materials. We spend 20% of all global energy just to make cement, steel, plastics, and fertilizer, the 4 pillars of the modern world. 20% of energy just to make those 4. We use over 40% of global energy just to make things. Aluminum and other metals and polysilicon and all these materials. This is the base of which everything else is made of.